Some mysteries refuse to stay buried. Across the centuries, people have vanished without a trace. Entire settlements have been abandoned overnight, and strange events have left behind questions that no historian, scientist, or investigator has ever fully answered. These are not legends created around campfires. They are real puzzles woven into the fabric of human history. What happened to those who disappeared? What secrets lie hidden beneath forgotten ruins and sealed records? Tonight, we journey into the shadows of the past, where fact is often stranger than fiction. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the creepiest mysteries history has ever left behind. Across the rugged plains and rolling hills of southern Anatolia, where winds sweep over forgotten valleys and ancient stones lie scattered beneath the sun, there may once have stood one of the most important cities of the Hittite world. It was known as Tarhuntassa, a royal city, a political center, and perhaps, for a time, a rival to the mighty capital of Hattusa itself. Today, however, its exact location remains one of the great archaeological mysteries of the ancient Near East. The story begins during the late Bronze Age, when the Hittite Empire dominated much of Anatolia and extended its influence across neighboring lands. In the 13th century BC, King Muwatalli II made a remarkable decision. For reasons that are still debated, he moved the royal court away from Hattusa and established a new center of power at Tarhuntassa. Ancient inscriptions describe the city as important and prosperous. It was not a minor settlement, but a place worthy of becoming the seat of an empire. Temples, palaces, administrative buildings, and archives may once have stood within its walls. Diplomats, soldiers, scribes, and priests likely filled its streets. Yet unlike Hattusa, whose ruins survive and have been extensively studied, Tarhuntassa appears to have vanished from the landscape. How could a city so significant simply disappear? Historians have spent decades searching for answers. Written records offer clues, but those clues are often frustratingly vague. The surviving texts place Tarhuntassa somewhere in southern Anatolia, possibly within a broad region stretching across parts of modern Turkey. Several archaeological sites have been proposed as candidates, each supported by intriguing evidence, yet none has been universally accepted. One of the strongest candidates has been the site of Kassite-Tepe. Excavations there have uncovered remains from the Bronze Age and signs of Hittite influence. Other researchers have pointed toward different locations, arguing that the scale and political importance described in ancient records require a much larger urban center. The debate continues, with each new discovery raising fresh questions. Part of the mystery lies in the dramatic collapse of the Hittite Empire around 1200 BC. Across the eastern Mediterranean, powerful kingdoms fell, trade networks fractured, and cities were abandoned. The reasons remain complex and contested. Climate change, famine, internal conflict, migration, and warfare have all been proposed as contributing factors. In this period of upheaval, Tarhuntassa seems to fade from history. Yet the city may not have disappeared immediately. Some inscriptions suggest that local rulers continued to govern in the region after the empire's decline. A powerful ruler named Karunta claimed authority there and left behind inscriptions that hint at political struggles and rival claims to legitimacy. Was Tarhuntassa briefly the center of a competing kingdom? Did it survive longer than historians once believed? The evidence is tantalizing but incomplete. As often happens with lost cities, the absence of definitive answers has encouraged more speculative ideas. Some wonder whether Tarhuntassa remains hidden beneath later settlements, buried under centuries of human occupation. Others suggest that natural changes in the landscape may have obscured its remains, concealing them beneath layers of sediment and vegetation. There are even theories that archaeologists may have already discovered the city without realizing it. Could ruins excavated decades ago belong to Tarhuntassa under another name? Could crucial inscriptions still lie undiscovered beneath fields, villages, or remote hillsides waiting to reveal the truth? The mystery is made even more compelling by the city's apparent importance. This was not an obscure outpost on the edge of an empire. Tarhuntassa was mentioned in royal treaties and political correspondence. Kings ruled from there. Decisions affecting vast territories may have been made within its halls. And yet, unlike many ancient capitals, its location remains uncertain. Perhaps somewhere beneath the soil of southern Anatolia, massive walls still stand hidden. Perhaps archives filled with clay tablets remain sealed in forgotten chambers. Or perhaps the traces of Tarhuntassa have been scattered so completely by time that only fragments will ever be found. For now, the lost city remains suspended between history and mystery, a place known to have existed, described in ancient records, influential in its day, yet still missing from the map of the ancient world. And until unmistakable evidence emerges, the question lingers quietly across the landscape. Where exactly was Tarhuntassa, and what secrets might still be waiting beneath the earth? Before moving to the next mystery, if you love deep dives into mysteries like this, I put together an entire ebook dedicated to the hidden secrets of ancient Egypt. The Egypt they don't cover in school, don't show in museums, and don't explain in mainstream documentaries. The link is right below this video. Now, let's get into the next mystery. As the echoes of our previous mystery fade into the distance, another ancient question emerges from the shadows of the Bronze Age, a question that has puzzled historians, archaeologists, and linguists for generations. It is a mystery not of a vanished monument or a lost treasure, but of an entire kingdom whose true identity remains uncertain. A kingdom known only through scattered clues, diplomatic letters, and fragments of memory. A place called Alashiya. Imagine a large island rising from the eastern Mediterranean, its rugged mountains visible from far out at sea. Along its shores, merchant ships arrive from distant lands, carrying goods, messages, and ambitions. Copper ingots, shaped like ox hides, are loaded onto vessels bound for powerful kingdoms across the ancient world. The air is filled with the sounds of trade, diplomacy, and industry. Somewhere in this landscape stood Alashiya, one of the most important powers of the late Bronze Age. Yet despite its significance, no one can say with complete certainty where Alashiya was. The kingdom first appears in written records dating to the 2nd millennium BC. Egyptian pharaohs corresponded with its rulers as equals, exchanging gifts and diplomatic messages. The famous Amarna letters reveal kings of Alashiya communicating directly with the great powers of their time. These letters describe shipments of copper so vast that they helped sustain entire economies. In an age when bronze was essential for weapons, tools, and prestige, copper was the lifeblood of civilization, and Alashiya seemed to possess it in abundance. For decades, scholars have searched for the kingdom behind the name. The mainstream view points toward Cyprus, an island renowned in antiquity for its rich copper deposits. Scientific analysis of clay tablets has strengthened this theory. The composition of the tablets appears consistent with materials found on Cyprus, suggesting that at least some correspondence originated there. But identifying Cyprus with Alashiya raises new questions. Was Alashiya the entire island? Or was it a powerful city-state controlling only part of it? If so, which city served as its capital? Archaeological sites such as Enkomi, Kalavasos, and Alassa have all been proposed as candidates. Each offers compelling evidence, yet none has produced definitive proof. The mystery deepens when we examine the ancient texts themselves. Some descriptions suggest a kingdom with considerable regional influence, one capable of maintaining diplomatic relations with Egypt, the Hittites, and other major powers. Yet the records are often frustratingly vague. They reveal enough to intrigue, but not enough to settle the debate. It is as though Alashiya exists just beyond the reach of certainty, appearing clearly for a moment before fading once again into obscurity. Then there are the events surrounding the collapse of the Bronze Age. During the turbulent years around the 12th century BC, many great civilizations experienced sudden disruption. Trade networks fractured, cities burned, kingdoms disappeared. Records from the era hint that Alashiya itself came under attack. Some letters speak of enemies arriving by sea, while others suggest mounting instability across the region. Was Alashiya overwhelmed by the same forces that reshaped the ancient Mediterranean? Or did it transform into something new, leaving behind only fragments of its former identity? More speculative theories venture even further. A few researchers have wondered whether Alashiya represented a broader political network rather than a single kingdom. Others have suggested that the name may have shifted over time, referring to different centers of power in different periods. Such ideas remain outside the scholarly consensus, yet they illustrate how elusive the mystery remains. Today, archaeologists continue to uncover clues buried beneath layers of earth and stone. Every inscription, every fragment of pottery, and every newly excavated structure offers another piece of the puzzle. Yet the complete picture remains frustratingly incomplete. Who were the rulers who called themselves kings of Alashiya? Where exactly did they govern from? And how could a kingdom so influential in its own time leave behind such uncertainty in ours? For now, Alashiya remains suspended between history and mystery, a name preserved in ancient correspondence, waiting for the discovery that may finally reveal the kingdom hidden behind it. And yet, Alashiya was not the only name drifting through the records of the late Bronze Age, like a shadow from a forgotten world. Beyond the copper roots and diplomatic exchanges, another mysterious land appears in ancient texts, a kingdom powerful enough to attract the attention of emperors, yet elusive enough that its true identity remains debated thousands of years later. Its name was Ahhiyawa. Picture the coastlines of the eastern Mediterranean more than 3,000 years ago. Across the sea, rugged mountains rise above scattered harbors. Merchant vessels move between islands and mainland ports, carrying bronze, pottery, olive oil, and news from distant kingdoms. Along these shores, great palaces oversee networks of trade stretching across hundreds of miles. Somewhere within this interconnected world, according to ancient records, lay the land of Ahhiyawa. The strange thing is that no surviving inscription clearly tells us where it was. Most of what we know comes from the archives of the Hittite Empire, one of the dominant powers of the late Bronze Age. Preserved on clay tablets buried for centuries beneath the soil of ancient Anatolia, these documents describe Ahhiyawa as a significant political force. Its rulers appear to have been treated with unusual respect, sometimes on terms comparable to those reserved for the greatest kings of the era. This immediately raises a fascinating question. Who were the people of Ahhiyawa that even the Hittites considered them worthy of such recognition? Today, the most widely accepted theory identifies Ahhiyawa with the Mycenaean Greeks, the civilization that flourished across mainland Greece during the 2nd millennium BC. Linguists have long noted similarities between the name Ahhiyawa and the word Achaeans, a term later associated with the Greeks in ancient epic traditions. Archaeological discoveries have strengthened this connection. Mycenaean pottery has been found across the eastern Mediterranean, demonstrating extensive trade networks and a far-reaching cultural presence. At first glance, the puzzle seems nearly solved, but history is rarely so simple. The Hittite texts never explicitly state that Ahhiyawa was Mycenaean Greece. Instead, they offer fragments of information, diplomatic disputes, military tensions, and references to distant territories. These clues point in a particular direction, but they stop short of providing certainty. Like pieces from a shattered mosaic, they reveal part of the image while leaving crucial sections missing. One especially intriguing document, often called the Tawagalawa letter, refers to interactions between the Hittite king and the ruler of Ahhiyawa. The tone suggests that Ahhiyawa possessed considerable influence in western Anatolia. Some historians see this as powerful evidence that a Mycenaean kingdom was actively involved in regional affairs far beyond the Greek mainland. Yet even if Ahhiyawa was linked to the Mycenaeans, questions remain. Was it a single kingdom, a coalition of rulers, a broader cultural sphere? Could the Hittites have used the name differently than modern scholars assume? The mystery becomes even more captivating when viewed alongside the legends that emerged centuries later. Ancient Greek traditions tell stories of great heroes, rival kingdoms, and a famous conflict centered on the city of Troy. Some researchers have noted possible connections between certain places mentioned in Hittite records and locations that appear in later Greek myths. The famous city of Wilusa, for example, is often compared to the legendary Troy. If such connections are valid, then Ahhiyawa may represent a real-world power lurking behind some of the most enduring stories ever told. But where does history end and legend begin? Not everyone agrees with the mainstream interpretation. Over the years, alternative theories have proposed different locations and identities. Some suggest that Ahhiyawa may have referred to a specific coastal kingdom rather than the broader Mycenaean world. Others argue that our understanding of the Hittite texts remains incomplete, and that future discoveries could radically alter the picture. The challenge is that every new clue seems to open another door. Archaeologists continue to excavate ancient settlements. Linguists continue to analyze inscriptions. Historians continue to compare fragments of evidence scattered across multiple civilizations. Yet despite decades of research, Ahhiyawa remains partially concealed behind the veil of time. Perhaps that is what makes the mystery so enduring. A powerful kingdom appears in official correspondence, influences international politics, and then gradually disappears from clear historical view. Its name survives, but its identity remains just beyond reach. And somewhere beneath forgotten ruins, buried archives, or unexplored layers of ancient cities, there may still exist a clue capable of answering a question that has echoed across millennia. Who were the people of Ahhiyawa, and what traces of their world remain hidden, waiting to be found? As the trail of Ahhiyawa fades into uncertainty, another lost kingdom emerges from the dust of the ancient Near East. Unlike Ahhiyawa, whose identity remains debated, this kingdom is known to history. Its rulers signed treaties, arranged royal marriages, and stood among the great powers of their age. Yet despite its prominence, it vanished so completely that for centuries its very existence was forgotten. This was the kingdom of Mitanni. Imagine the broad plains of northern Mesopotamia, where fertile river valleys stretch toward distant horizons. In the 2nd millennium BC, caravans crossed these lands carrying goods from every corner of the known world. Fortified cities rose above the countryside, their walls glowing beneath the sun. Palaces housed kings who negotiated with pharaohs and emperors. For a time, Mitanni was one of the most influential kingdoms in the ancient world. And then, almost as suddenly as it had appeared, it disappeared. The story begins in a region that today spans parts of modern-day Syria, Iraq, and southeastern Turkey. During the 15th and 14th centuries BC, Mitanni emerged as a major political force. Its rulers controlled strategic trade routes and fertile agricultural lands. They competed with powerful neighbors, including Egypt, the Hittite Empire, and Assyria. Ancient records portray Mitanni as a respected kingdom whose royal family exchanged diplomatic correspondence with some of the most powerful rulers of the age. Princesses from Mitanni married Egyptian pharaohs. Treaties were negotiated. Alliances were forged. For a period, Mitanni stood at the center of an interconnected international world. Yet beneath this image of stability, mysteries linger. One of the first questions concerns the people themselves. The majority of the population appears to have spoken a Hurrian language, but certain royal names, religious references, and technical terms seem connected to ancient Indo-Aryan traditions. Some treaties invoke deities whose names resemble those found in early Sanskrit texts. Horse training manuals contain terminology with striking linguistic similarities to words known from ancient India. How did these elements find their way into the ruling culture of Mitanni? Most scholars believe they reflect the influence of a small elite group that became integrated into the kingdom's leadership. Yet the exact nature of that influence remains uncertain. Were these traces remnants of distant migrations, evidence of cultural exchange, or clues to a more complex story that has yet to be fully understood? Then there is the mystery of Mitanni's collapse. Historical records suggest that pressure began mounting from multiple directions. The Hittites expanded their influence from the northwest. Assyria grew increasingly powerful to the east. Internal political struggles may have weakened the kingdom from within. Piece by piece, Mitanni appears to have lost territory, authority, and independence. According to the conventional narrative, the kingdom was gradually absorbed by stronger rivals. By the late 14th century BC, much of its former power had vanished, and Assyria eventually emerged as the dominant force in the region. On paper, the explanation seems straightforward. But when archaeologists search for the physical remains of Mitanni's political heart, the picture becomes far less clear. For decades, scholars debated the location of its capital, known as Washukani. Ancient texts refer to the city repeatedly, yet its precise location remains uncertain. Numerous sites have been proposed, but definitive proof has remained elusive. It is a strange situation. A kingdom that influenced international politics for generations, yet whose capital city still hides from modern certainty. The absence of Washukani has fueled speculation. Some researchers wonder whether future excavations will uncover archives capable of transforming our understanding of Mitanni overnight. Others suggest that key evidence may still lie buried beneath settlements that have never been fully explored. More speculative theories occasionally venture beyond the available evidence. Some imagine lost libraries, hidden administrative centers, or undiscovered royal tombs waiting beneath the soil. While such ideas remain unproven, they reflect the enduring fascination surrounding a kingdom that seems to retreat into shadow whenever historians believe they are close to understanding it. Even today, excavations across northern Mesopotamia continue to reveal fragments of Mitanni's world. A palace foundation here, a seal impression there, a forgotten inscription emerging from beneath centuries of earth. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, but the complete picture remains frustratingly incomplete. Perhaps that is the true mystery of Mitanni, not simply how it disappeared, but how a kingdom that once stood among the great powers of its age could leave behind so many unanswered questions. Somewhere beneath ancient ruins, hidden beneath layers of history, the missing chapters of its story may still survive, waiting for the moment when they finally return to the light. Perhaps that is the true mystery of Mitanni, not simply how it disappeared, but how a kingdom that once stood among the great powers of its age could leave behind so many unanswered questions. Somewhere beneath ancient ruins, hidden beneath layers of history, the missing chapters of its story may still survive, waiting for the moment when they finally return to the light. As the unanswered questions of Mitanni fade into the distance, another mystery emerges from the ruins of a kingdom that once rivaled the greatest powers of the ancient world. This mystery is not centered on a lost city or a vanished ruler, but on something perhaps even more valuable: knowledge itself. Hidden within clay tablets, royal decrees, diplomatic letters, and sacred rituals was the accumulated memory of an empire. Yet when that empire fell, a portion of that memory seems to have vanished with it. The mystery begins among the windswept hills of central Anatolia, where the ruined capital of Hattusa still rests beneath the open sky. Imagine approaching the city in its final centuries. Massive stone gates guard the entrances. Temples, palaces, and administrative buildings fill the landscape. Messengers move through the streets carrying official documents. Scribes sit in quiet chambers, pressing wedge-shaped symbols into damp clay. Around them, shelves hold thousands of tablets recording treaties, laws, military campaigns, religious ceremonies, and diplomatic correspondence. Together, these records formed one of the most extensive archives of the Bronze Age. Then came the collapse. Around the early 12th century BC, Hattusa was abandoned. The reasons remain debated. Some scholars point to invasion, others to internal instability, economic disruption, climate pressures, or a combination of factors. Whatever the cause, the capital of the Hittite Empire ceased to function as the center of a great kingdom. What happened next is where the mystery begins. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of tablets at Hattusa, preserving remarkable details about Hittite civilization. Without them, much of the empire's history would have remained unknown. Yet many researchers believe that the surviving tablets represent only a fraction of what once existed. The archives discovered so far are impressive, but what if they are incomplete? Ancient empires depended upon records. Administrative systems generated enormous quantities of documents. Diplomatic correspondence connected rulers across vast distances. Religious institutions maintained ritual texts and ceremonial instructions. Royal courts preserved legal decisions and historical accounts. Given the scale of the Hittite state, could all of its archives truly have remained behind in the ruins? Some evidence suggests otherwise. Certain texts reference documents that have never been found. Other records appear to be copies of earlier works whose originals are missing. There are gaps in historical sequences that hint at lost collections. It is as though entire sections of the imperial memory have disappeared from the archaeological record. One possibility is straightforward. Many tablets may simply remain buried beneath unexplored areas of Hattusa or other Hittite sites. Excavations have revealed only portions of the ancient city, and every archaeological season has the potential to uncover new material. In this view, the missing archives are not truly lost. They are merely waiting to be rediscovered. Yet other possibilities are more intriguing. Some historians have proposed that portions of the royal archives were deliberately removed before the city's final abandonment. If officials anticipated disaster, they may have attempted to preserve important records by transporting them elsewhere. Valuable state documents could have been carried to regional strongholds, hidden in temples, or relocated to successor settlements. If that happened, where did they go? No confirmed cache of relocated royal archives has ever been identified. The mystery becomes even more compelling when viewed against the broader collapse of the Bronze Age world. Across the eastern Mediterranean, kingdoms fell, trade routes fractured, and entire political systems disappeared. During such chaotic times, the movement of archives may not have been unusual. Important records could have been scattered, destroyed, forgotten, or absorbed into emerging societies. More speculative theories occasionally push the mystery further. Some suggest that undiscovered archive chambers may still lie hidden beneath collapsed buildings. Others wonder whether collections of tablets were transported to locations that have not yet been recognized as significant archaeological sites. A few even imagine vast repositories of documents waiting beneath untouched layers of earth somewhere in Anatolia. Such ideas remain unproven, but they highlight a fascinating reality. The survival of history often depends upon chance. A fire that hardens clay tablets instead of destroying them, a collapsed wall that protects documents from weather, an abandoned room left undisturbed for 3,000 years. Because of such accidents, fragments of the Hittite world have reached us. Yet countless other records may not have been so fortunate. Even today, the tablets recovered from Hattusa continue to reveal new information as scholars translate and re-examine them. Every inscription adds another voice from a civilization long gone. And yet, the possibility remains that entire chapters of Hittite history are still missing. Somewhere beneath forgotten ruins, hidden beneath layers of stone and soil, there may still exist shelves of clay tablets untouched since the fall of Hattusa. If they are ever found, what stories might they tell? What secrets of kings, wars, treaties, and beliefs remain locked within those silent archives, waiting for someone to read them once again? If the missing archives of Hattusa represent lost memories of a fallen empire, then the fate of Ugarit presents a different kind of mystery. The story of a thriving city whose final days seem frozen in time. Unlike many ancient civilizations that disappeared gradually, Ugarit left behind something extraordinary, a glimpse of catastrophe unfolding almost in real time. Along the Mediterranean coast, where sea winds sweep across fertile plains and waves break against rocky shores, stood one of the most prosperous city-states of the late Bronze Age. Merchants arrived from distant kingdoms. Ships crowded its harbor. Diplomats exchanged messages with rulers across the known world. Temples rose above busy streets, and scribes recorded the affairs of merchants, kings, and priests on clay tablets. This was Ugarit. For centuries, the city flourished as a crossroads between civilizations. Located in what is now northern Syria, Ugarit occupied a strategic position connecting the Mediterranean world with the great kingdoms of the interior. Trade brought wealth. Cultural exchange brought innovation. Its archives reveal a society deeply connected to Egypt, the Hittites, Cyprus, Mesopotamia, and many other regions. Yet despite its success, Ugarit vanished. Today, the ruins are silent, but the clay tablets discovered there tell a haunting story. Imagine a scribe sitting in a palace office sometime around the early 12th century BC. Messages arrive carrying troubling news. Reports speak of instability along the coast. Enemies are moving. Ships have been sighted. Allies are unable to provide assistance. One famous letter appears almost desperate in tone. A ruler appeals for help while describing a dangerous situation unfolding around him. Another document suggests that military forces were absent from the city when the crisis struck. Together, these texts create a remarkable impression. Not a distant memory of disaster, but a civilization witnessing its own collapse. And then the records stop. Archaeological evidence indicates that Ugarit was destroyed by fire. Buildings collapsed. Administrative centers were abandoned. Daily life came to an abrupt end. Unlike cities that recovered after conflict, Ugarit never regained its former importance. The question is why? The traditional explanation places Ugarit's destruction within the broader collapse of the Bronze Age. Across the eastern Mediterranean, powerful kingdoms were falling. Trade routes broke down. Political systems unraveled. Populations migrated. The interconnected world that had existed for centuries began to fragment. Within this context, Ugarit's destruction appears to be one piece of a much larger crisis. Yet the details remain frustratingly uncertain. Ancient Egyptian records refer to groups often called the Sea Peoples, mysterious maritime raiders associated with upheaval across the region. Some scholars believe these groups played a major role in Ugarit's downfall. The timing seems to fit. The evidence suggests attacks from the sea. Coastal settlements throughout the Mediterranean experienced similar disruptions. But who exactly were these sea peoples? Were they invading armies? Displaced refugees searching for new homes? Coalitions formed from multiple cultures? The answer remains one of history's enduring mysteries. Other researchers point to additional factors. Climate studies suggest periods of drought may have placed enormous strain on agricultural systems. Economic networks that connected distant kingdoms may have become increasingly fragile. Internal political instability could have weakened cities before external threats arrived. Perhaps Ugarit did not fall because of a single event. Perhaps it was caught in a perfect storm of interconnected crises. The mystery deepens when considering what was lost. Ugarit possessed one of the most important archives ever discovered in the ancient Near East. Thousands of tablets preserved myths, legal texts, diplomatic correspondence, and commercial records. These documents transformed modern understanding of ancient cultures and religions. Yet many questions remain unanswered. How much of Ugarit's literature disappeared in the flames? How many records were destroyed before they could survive to reach the modern world? Could entire libraries have vanished without leaving a trace? More speculative theories occasionally suggest hidden archives waiting beneath unexcavated sections of the site. Others imagine that refugees fleeing the city's destruction carried important texts elsewhere, where they remain undiscovered. While evidence for such possibilities is limited, the idea reflects a broader truth. Much of Ugarit's story may still lie buried beneath the earth. What makes Ugarit especially haunting is the sense of immediacy preserved in its final records. Few ancient cities allow us to stand so close to the moment of collapse. Through letters, tablets, and ruined buildings, we glimpse people confronting uncertainty without knowing how their story would end. And perhaps that is why the mystery continues to captivate historians. Somewhere between the last message written, the last ship sighted on the horizon, and the first flames that consumed the city, the final chapter of Ugarit remains hidden. The ruins tell part of the story, but what happened during those final days, and what secrets may still rest beneath the fallen stones, remains a question carried forward through the centuries. As the ashes of Ugarit settled and the great cities of the Bronze Age drifted toward collapse, some traces of that vanished world escaped destruction altogether. Instead of being buried beneath ruined walls or hidden beneath layers of earth, they sank into the depths of the Mediterranean Sea. There, untouched by sunlight for more than 3,000 years, they waited. When they were finally discovered, they revealed one of the most extraordinary collections of ancient wealth ever found. The mystery begins beneath clear blue waters off the southern coast of Anatolia. Far below the surface, resting on a steep underwater slope, lay the remains of a ship that had not seen daylight since the 14th century BC. Its wooden hull had long since disappeared, but its cargo remained scattered across the seabed like the contents of a forgotten treasure chamber. This was the Uluburun Shipwreck. At first glance, the discovery seemed almost unbelievable. Divers exploring the site encountered hundreds of copper ingots stacked across the wreck. Nearby lay tin ingots, precious raw materials essential for producing bronze. There were luxury goods crafted from ivory, glass, gold, ebony, and exotic animal products. Fine jewelry rested among ceramic vessels. Weapons, tools, and personal belongings lay frozen in time. The cargo represented an astonishing concentration of wealth. But where had it come from? And perhaps more importantly, where had it been going? The ship dates to a period when the great kingdoms of the eastern Mediterranean were connected through vast trade networks. Egypt, the Hittites, Cyprus, Mycenaean Greece, and numerous city-states exchanged goods across enormous distances. The Uluburun cargo seems to reflect this interconnected world. Materials from multiple regions were gathered together aboard a single vessel. Some of the copper likely originated in Cyprus. The ivory may have come from Africa. Certain luxury items suggest connections stretching across the Near East. Glass ingots display remarkable craftsmanship. Even small objects hint at journeys covering hundreds or even thousands of miles. In many ways, the ship appears to be a floating snapshot of international commerce at its peak. Yet the sheer scale of its wealth raises intriguing questions. Why was so much valuable cargo concentrated aboard a single vessel? One conventional explanation is that the ship was engaged in elite trade. The goods may have been destined for royal courts, wealthy merchants, or powerful administrators. During the late Bronze Age, diplomatic gift exchanges often involved extraordinary quantities of luxury items. Kings demonstrated prestige through displays of wealth, and valuable cargoes regularly crossed the Mediterranean. This interpretation fits much of the evidence, but not all of it. Some scholars have noted that the cargo appears unusually diverse, even for long-distance trade. Rather than representing the products of one kingdom, it seems to gather materials from many different cultures. The ship almost resembles a moving marketplace carrying the riches of an entire world. Was it transporting diplomatic gifts, commercial goods, tribute payments, materials intended for a royal wedding or political alliance? No surviving document provides a definitive answer. The mystery deepens when attention turns to several seemingly personal objects found among the cargo. Scarabs, jewelry, tools, and small luxury items suggest the presence of individuals whose identities remain unknown. Were they merchants, sailors, diplomats, representatives of royal households? Their names have vanished. Only their possessions remain. Then there is the question of the ship's final voyage. Something caused this heavily laden vessel to sink before reaching its destination. Most researchers point toward a maritime accident. Storms were common in the Mediterranean, and the ship's valuable cargo may have made navigation especially challenging. A sudden squall, shifting currents, or navigational error could have sent the vessel to the bottom. Yet because no written account survives, certainty remains impossible. More speculative theories occasionally suggest darker possibilities. Could piracy have played a role? Was the ship fleeing regional instability? Might its cargo have been connected to political events now lost to history? Evidence for such ideas remains limited, but the lack of definitive answers leaves room for continued debate. What makes the Uluburun Shipwreck so fascinating is not merely its wealth, but what that wealth reveals. Every object represents a connection between distant peoples. Every artifact hints at journeys, agreements, ambitions, and relationships that once linked civilizations across the sea. And yet, despite decades of study, the most important details remain elusive. We know what the ship carried. We have some idea where many of its treasures originated, but the identities of those who commissioned the voyage, the exact purpose of the cargo, and the destination it never reached remain partly hidden beneath the currents of time. Somewhere within the story of that lost ship may lie a deeper understanding of the Bronze Age world itself. But until new evidence emerges, the Uluburun wreck remains suspended between history and mystery, a treasure-filled vessel resting in silence, still guarding secrets from a journey that ended more than 3,000 years ago. While the Uluburun shipwreck preserves a single moment frozen beneath the sea, another mystery survives beneath the desert sun, a city that was not lost to a storm, invasion, or natural disaster, but seemingly abandoned by the very ruler who created it. Its ruins stretch across the sands of Egypt, silent witnesses to one of the most dramatic experiments in ancient history. This was Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. Imagine standing on the eastern bank of the Nile during the 14th century BC. Before you rises a city unlike any that had come before it. Wide avenues cut across the landscape. Temples stand open to the sunlight rather than hidden within dark sanctuaries. Palaces gleam beneath the desert sky. Everywhere, inscriptions celebrate a single divine force represented by the radiant disk of the sun. The city did not emerge gradually over centuries. It appeared almost overnight. Its creator was Pharaoh Akhenaten, one of the most enigmatic rulers of ancient Egypt. Early in his reign, he initiated a profound transformation of religious life. Rejecting many long-established traditions, He elevated the worship of the Aten to unprecedented prominence and founded an entirely new capital far from the political and religious centers that had dominated Egyptian history. The location was carefully chosen. Nestled between desert cliffs and the Nile, the site occupied a previously undeveloped stretch of land. Boundary stelae carved into the surrounding rock proclaimed that the city belonged uniquely to the Aten and to the king's vision. Construction proceeded with remarkable speed. Workers, craftsmen, officials, and priests poured into the area, creating a thriving urban center in only a few years. For a brief moment, Akhetaten became the heart of an empire, and then, just as suddenly, it was abandoned. The mystery begins with this astonishing reversal. Following Akhenaten's death, the city rapidly declined. Later rulers restored many traditional religious practices and shifted political authority elsewhere. Within a relatively short period, Akhetaten was largely deserted. Buildings fell into ruin. Stone blocks were dismantled and reused in other construction projects. The city that had once embodied a revolutionary vision faded into silence. Why? The conventional explanation appears straightforward. Akhenaten's religious reforms were deeply controversial. By concentrating worship around the Aten and diminishing the influence of established temples, he disrupted powerful institutions that had shaped Egyptian society for generations. After his death, political leaders may have sought stability by reversing his policies and distancing themselves from his legacy. Yet many questions remain. How deeply did ordinary people embrace the changes introduced at Akhetaten? Were they devoted participants in a new spiritual movement, or reluctant inhabitants following royal commands? Archaeological discoveries offer glimpses into daily life, but the full picture remains elusive. The city itself adds to the mystery. Unlike many ancient capitals built layer upon layer over centuries, Akhetaten existed for only a brief period. As a result, archaeologists have been able to study an unusually clear snapshot of a living Bronze Age city. Houses, workshops, temples, administrative buildings, and cemeteries reveal details about both elites and common citizens. Yet these discoveries often raise as many questions as they answer. Among the most fascinating finds are the diplomatic tablets known as the Amarna letters. These records document correspondence between Egypt and foreign rulers across the ancient Near East. They reveal a world of alliances, rivalries, requests for aid, and international politics unfolding during Akhenaten's reign. Curiously, some letters suggest growing instability beyond Egypt's borders. Regional powers struggled for influence. Local rulers requested military assistance. Political tensions simmered across the interconnected world of the Late Bronze Age. Did these broader challenges contribute to Akhetaten's fate? Or was the city's abandonment driven almost entirely by internal religious and political changes? More speculative theories occasionally venture beyond the available evidence. Some wonder whether Akhenaten possessed motivations that remain poorly understood. Others suggest that significant portions of the city's story may have been deliberately erased by successors seeking to reshape historical memory. Since many monuments were damaged or altered after his reign, it is difficult to determine exactly how much information may have been lost. Even the king himself remains an enigmatic figure. Was he a visionary reformer, a radical idealist, a political strategist, or something else entirely? The answer often depends on which evidence is emphasized and how it is interpreted. Today, the winds move quietly across the ruins of Akhetaten. Foundations trace the outlines of vanished streets. Desert sands cover what remains of homes once filled with life. The city endures as a monument to a brief and extraordinary moment when an empire attempted to reinvent itself. Yet beneath those ruins linger unanswered questions. Why was such a magnificent capital abandoned so quickly? How much of its history was intentionally forgotten? And what secrets of Akhenaten's remarkable experiment may still lie buried beneath the sands, waiting for another voice from the ancient world to emerge and tell its story? As the abandoned streets of Akhetaten fade into the desert horizon, another mystery emerges from the records of ancient Egypt. Not the mystery of a forgotten city, but of a distant land. A place known to pharaohs, merchants, and sailors. A land rich in treasures, celebrated in temple inscriptions, and remembered as a source of wonders from beyond the edge of the known world. And yet, despite centuries of study, no one can say with complete certainty where it was. The Egyptians called it Punt. Imagine a coastline somewhere beyond Egypt's southern horizons. The air is heavy with the scent of incense trees. Exotic animals move through unfamiliar forests. Ships arrive carrying gold, ivory, ebony, precious resins, and rare goods unavailable in the Nile Valley. For the Egyptians, Punt was more than a trading partner. It was often described as a place of abundance, a land that seemed almost legendary in its wealth. Ancient texts referred to it with remarkable respect. Some inscriptions even called it God's land. Yet the exact location of this celebrated destination remains one of the oldest geographical mysteries in history. The most famous account comes from the reign of Pharaoh Hatshepsut during the 15th century BC. Reliefs carved on the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari depict a remarkable expedition to Punt. The scenes show Egyptian ships arriving in a foreign land, meeting local rulers and returning with valuable cargo. The images are unusually detailed. They depict houses raised on stilts, distinctive vegetation, incense trees transported back to Egypt, and people whose appearance differs from the Egyptians themselves. These artistic records provide some of the best clues available to modern researchers, and yet they have not solved the mystery. For generations, scholars have searched for Punt's location. The most widely accepted theory places it somewhere along the western coast of the Red Sea, likely in regions associated with modern Eritrea, eastern Sudan, Djibouti, or parts of Somalia. This interpretation is supported by trade goods, environmental clues, and the logistical realities of ancient seafaring. Certain animals and plants depicted in Egyptian records are consistent with areas in the Horn of Africa. Scientific studies have strengthened this view. Analyses of animal remains and ancient trade products have sometimes pointed toward northeastern Africa as a probable source. But certainty remains elusive. One reason is that Punt does not appear to have been a clearly defined kingdom in the way Egypt or the Hittite Empire was. The name may have referred to a trading region, a collection of coastal communities, or a broader geographical zone rather than a single political state. If so, what exactly were Egyptian sailors visiting? A city? A kingdom? A network of ports? The mystery becomes even more intriguing when considering how Punt was described. Egyptian records often portray the land with a sense of admiration and wonder. Unlike many foreign regions discussed in military campaigns, Punt appears in a largely positive context, associated with prosperity, rare resources, and successful trade. This unusual portrayal has encouraged some researchers to ask whether Punt held a special cultural or religious significance beyond commerce alone. Then there are the more speculative theories. Over the years, various alternative proposals have emerged. Some have suggested locations deeper within Africa. Others have argued for sites elsewhere along the Arabian coast. A few theories have attempted to connect Punt to regions far beyond the mainstream archaeological consensus. While most of these ideas remain unsupported by strong evidence, they illustrate how little certainty still exists. The problem is simple. No inscription has yet been discovered that definitively identifies Punt on a map. Instead, researchers must assemble fragments of evidence from reliefs, trade goods, botanical remains, animal studies, linguistic clues, and ancient sailing routes. Each piece contributes to the puzzle, but none provides a complete solution. What makes the mystery especially compelling is that Punt was clearly real. Unlike purely legendary places, it appears repeatedly in Egyptian records across centuries. Expeditions were organized, goods were exchanged, people traveled there and returned. And yet, the precise location of this famous land remains hidden behind the passage of time. Somewhere along ancient coastlines, beneath forgotten settlements or undiscovered harbors, there may still be evidence waiting to emerge. Perhaps a future excavation will uncover inscriptions linking a specific port to Egyptian expeditions. Perhaps a lost archive will finally reveal where the ships of Punt sailed from. Until then, the land of Punt remains suspended between geography and legend, a place known well enough to be celebrated by pharaohs, yet mysterious enough that its exact location continues to elude us. And somewhere beyond the horizon of recorded history, the true shores of Punt may still be waiting to be found. As the search for the distant shores of Punt fades into the horizon, a darker mystery emerges from the closing years of the Bronze Age. It is a mystery scattered across hundreds of miles, preserved not in a single city or a single kingdom, but in layers of ash, collapsed walls, and abandoned streets. From the coasts of the Mediterranean to the heartlands of powerful empires, archaeologists continue to uncover the same unsettling pattern. Around 1200 BC, something happened, and in many places, the earth still bears the scars. Imagine standing in a thriving Bronze Age city. Ships crowd the harbor, merchants bargain in busy marketplaces, scribes record transactions on clay tablets. Palaces oversee vast networks of trade stretching across the eastern Mediterranean. Copper, tin, gold, ivory, grain, and luxury goods flow between kingdoms in a complex web of exchange. Then, suddenly, everything changes. Buildings burn, trade routes collapse, populations disperse, entire political systems disappear. When archaeologists excavate ancient sites from this period, they often encounter a striking feature: destruction layers. Beneath later settlements or open ground lies evidence of catastrophe: charred timbers, broken pottery, toppled walls, and thick deposits of ash. These layers appear at numerous sites across the region, often dating to roughly the same turbulent era. The pattern is difficult to ignore. Cities that had flourished for centuries experienced destruction or abandonment. Ugarit vanished. Hattusa fell silent. Mycenaean palaces declined. Many smaller settlements also suffered disruption. The interconnected world of the late Bronze Age fragmented with astonishing speed. But what caused it? For generations, historians have searched for answers. One of the most familiar explanations involves the mysterious Sea Peoples. Ancient Egyptian inscriptions describe groups arriving by land and sea during a period of widespread instability. These forces appear to have challenged powerful kingdoms and disrupted established systems. Some researchers view them as a major factor in the destruction seen across the eastern Mediterranean. Yet significant questions remain. Who exactly were the Sea Peoples? Were they invaders from distant lands? Coalitions formed by displaced populations? Refugees fleeing crises elsewhere? The surviving records offer tantalizing clues, but few definitive answers. Another possibility points toward climate. Scientific studies suggest that periods of drought may have affected parts of the eastern Mediterranean around this time. Reduced harvests could have strained economies dependent on agriculture. Food shortages might have encouraged migration, political unrest, and competition for resources. A prolonged drought alone might not destroy civilizations, but combined with other pressures, it could become part of a much larger crisis. Then there is the fragile nature of the Bronze Age world itself. The great kingdoms of the era depended upon complex trade networks. Copper from one region, tin from another, luxury goods from distant ports. diplomatic relationships maintained through constant communication, everything was connected. Such systems could be remarkably prosperous, but they could also be vulnerable. What happens when enough links in the chain begin to fail? Some scholars describe the collapse as a form of systemic breakdown. Political instability weakens trade. Economic disruption reduces resources. Food shortages increase tensions. Warfare becomes more frequent. Each problem intensifies the next until the entire structure begins to unravel. In this interpretation, there was no single cause. The collapse was a cascade. Yet the destruction layers themselves continue to raise difficult questions. At some sites, evidence suggests violent attacks. At others, earthquakes may have played a role. Elsewhere, abandonment appears gradual rather than sudden. The archaeological record resists simple explanations. Every city tells a slightly different story. This has encouraged more speculative theories over the years. Some researchers have wondered whether clusters of earthquakes created a chain reaction of destruction across the region. Others have explored the possibility of previously underestimated environmental changes. More fringe proposals have invoked unusual celestial events or catastrophes not yet supported by strong evidence. What makes the mystery enduring is that none of these explanations fully accounts for every detail. The destruction layers remain stubbornly complex. Each burned palace, abandoned harbor, and ruined fortress represents a local tragedy. Yet together, they form part of a larger puzzle spanning thousands of miles. The same era that witnessed the disappearance of kingdoms, the abandonment of cities, and the collapse of trade networks also left behind a landscape marked by fire and silence. Today, archaeologists continue to uncover new evidence buried beneath ancient ruins. Every excavation reveals another fragment of the story. A burned doorway, a hastily abandoned storeroom, a final letter written before disaster struck. And still, the full picture remains elusive. Perhaps there was no single moment when the Bronze Age world ended. Perhaps it was a series of interconnected crises unfolding across generations. Or perhaps some crucial piece of evidence remains hidden beneath unexplored ruins, waiting to reshape everything we think we know. Until that evidence emerges, the destruction layers of 1200 BC remain among history's most haunting clues, silent witnesses to a transformation so profound that entire civilizations disappeared, leaving only ashes, questions, and mysteries buried beneath the earth. If the destruction layers of the Eastern Mediterranean remind us how entire civilizations can be brought to the brink of collapse, the next mystery narrows our focus from kingdoms and empires to a single individual, a young ruler whose name would become more famous than almost any other pharaoh in history. Yet despite the treasures found within his tomb, one of the most important questions about him remains unanswered. How did Tutankhamun die? Deep within the Valley of the Kings, hidden among the barren cliffs of southern Egypt, a small tomb lay undisturbed for more than 3,000 years. Behind sealed doorways rested golden shrines, ceremonial objects, chariots, jewelry, weapons, and countless treasures untouched by time. When archaeologists entered the tomb in 1922, the discovery captured the imagination of the world. At its center rested the mummy of a young king, a pharaoh who had ruled during one of the most turbulent periods in Egyptian history, a king who died before reaching adulthood, and a death that continues to inspire debate more than 3 millennia later. Tutankhamun ascended the throne around the age of 9. His reign followed the controversial era of Akhenaten, the ruler associated with the abandoned capital of Akhetaten and dramatic religious reforms that had transformed Egyptian society. By the time Tutankhamun became king, Egypt was navigating a period of political and religious transition. Traditional beliefs were being restored. Old institutions were regaining influence. The kingdom was attempting to move beyond the upheavals of the Amarna period. Yet Tutankhamun himself would not live long enough to leave a substantial legacy. He died at approximately 18 or 19 years of age. The records tell us that he died. They do not clearly tell us why, and that silence has created one of Egypt's most enduring mysteries. For decades, scholars struggled to understand the circumstances surrounding his death. Early examinations of the mummy raised more questions than answers. Damage to the remains complicated analysis. Some injuries appeared suspicious. Others may have occurred long after death during mummification or excavation. The mystery deepened in the 20th century when X-rays revealed what appeared to be fragments of bone inside the skull. Could this indicate a fatal head injury? Had the young king been murdered? The possibility ignited public fascination. A dramatic story seemed to emerge. A young pharaoh. A kingdom undergoing political change. Powerful figures surrounding the throne. An unexplained death. For many years, murder became one of the most popular theories. Some suspected court intrigue. Others pointed toward ambitious officials who might have benefited from the king's death. Attention often focused on individuals who rose to prominence after Tutankhamun's passing, including powerful advisors and military leaders. The theory possessed all the elements of a historical mystery. Yet as scientific methods improved, the evidence became more complicated. Modern CT scans provided a far more detailed view of the mummy than earlier examinations. Researchers concluded that the supposed skull injury was unlikely to have caused death. Some of the damage previously interpreted as trauma appeared to have occurred after mummification. The murder theory, while intriguing, became increasingly difficult to support with physical evidence. But if not murder, then what? The scans revealed another important clue. Tutankhamun suffered from multiple health issues. His skeleton showed evidence of physical abnormalities, including problems affecting his feet. Some studies suggest he may have required walking aids, several of which were found within his tomb. Genetic research has also indicated that he may have experienced inherited health challenges linked to royal family intermarriage. The image that emerges is not necessarily that of a strong and healthy young ruler. Instead, it is a portrait of someone who may have struggled with significant medical conditions throughout his life. Could illness alone explain his death? Possibly. Yet the mystery grows more complex. Further investigations identified evidence suggesting that Tutankhamun contracted malaria. This finding introduced another possibility. A weakened immune system combined with infectious disease could have placed the young king at considerable risk. In ancient Egypt, even relatively common illnesses could become deadly. Without modern medicine, survival often depended upon circumstances beyond anyone's control. Then another clue emerged. Examinations revealed a severe fracture in one of Tutankhamun's legs. The injury appears to have occurred shortly before his death. Was it an accident, a fall, a chariot crash, or something else entirely? The timing is significant because such an injury could have created complications, particularly if infection developed. Some researchers have proposed that the fracture, combined with illness, may have contributed to his death. The theory is plausible, but certainty remains elusive. The evidence points toward possibilities rather than definitive conclusions. The mystery becomes even more intriguing when viewed within its political context. Tutankhamun died without a clear heir. His death created uncertainty at the highest levels of Egyptian government. Surviving documents hint at unusual diplomatic activity following his passing, including communications involving the royal widow and foreign powers. One famous account describes an Egyptian queen requesting a foreign prince as a husband, a highly unusual event in Egyptian history. The prince never arrived. He died under mysterious circumstances during the journey. These events occurred after Tutankhamun's death, yet they contribute to the atmosphere of uncertainty surrounding the period. Were these simply unrelated political developments? Or do they hint at deeper struggles occurring behind palace walls? The evidence remains frustratingly incomplete. As often happens with famous historical mysteries, more speculative theories have flourished over the years. Some suggest secret conspiracies within the royal court. Others imagine political assassinations concealed by official records. A few theories connect Tutankhamun's death to broader power struggles linked to the aftermath of Akhenaten's reign. Most historians approach such claims cautiously. The available evidence simply does not allow definitive conclusions. Yet, neither does it eliminate every possibility. Perhaps that is why the mystery continues to endure. Unlike many ancient rulers, Tutankhamun's body survives. His tomb was discovered largely intact. His possessions remain remarkably well preserved. We know more about him than about countless other pharaohs. And yet one of the most basic facts about his life remains uncertain. How did he die? The irony is striking. A king preserved more completely than almost any other ancient ruler still guards one of history's most elusive secrets. His golden mask has become an icon recognized around the world. His treasures fill museum exhibitions. His name is known by millions, yet the final chapter of his story remains partly hidden. And somewhere between medical evidence, political history, archaeological discovery, and the passage of 3,000 years, the truth may still be waiting. As researchers continue to study the mummy, re-examine ancient records, and apply new technologies to old questions, the mystery remains suspended between science and speculation. And in the silent darkness of the Valley of the Kings, one question continues to echo through the centuries. Was Tutankhamun the victim of illness, accident, political intrigue, or something else entirely? And will we ever truly know what happened during the final days of Egypt's most famous young pharaoh? If the death of Tutankhamun reminds us how a single unanswered question can echo across thousands of years, the next mystery concerns the disappearance of an entire civilization, one whose influence once stretched across the Aegean Sea, whose palaces dominated the landscape, and whose legacy may still survive in some of the most famous legends ever told. For centuries, they were among the most powerful people in the Mediterranean. Then, almost inexplicably, their world unraveled. This is the mystery of the Mycenaeans. Across the rugged hills of mainland Greece, massive stone walls still rise above the landscape. Their blocks are so enormous that later generations believed only giants could have moved them. Ancient gateways stand weathered by time. Royal tombs lie hidden beneath grassy mounds. The ruins of palaces overlook valleys that were once filled with farms, roads, and thriving communities. Today, these places are silent. But more than 3,000 years ago, they formed the heart of a civilization that dominated much of the Aegean world. The Mycenaeans were warriors, traders, builders, and rulers. Their ships crossed the Mediterranean. Their merchants exchanged goods with distant kingdoms. Their scribes recorded administrative affairs on clay tablets. Their palaces controlled networks of settlements connected through trade, diplomacy, and military power. For generations, the Mycenaean world flourished. Then, around 1200 BC, something changed, and within a surprisingly short period of time, the civilization entered a dramatic decline from which it would never fully recover. The mystery begins with the archaeological evidence. At sites such as Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos, and others, archaeologists have uncovered signs of destruction dating to the late Bronze Age. Buildings burned, administrative systems collapsed. Palaces that once served as centers of power ceased functioning. The clay tablets stop. The bureaucracy disappears. The world reflected in the records suddenly falls silent. Why? The answer remains one of history's most enduring debates. For many years, invasion offered the most popular explanation. Ancient Greek traditions spoke of migrations and conflicts following the age of legendary heroes. Later writers described movements of peoples that may have reshaped the Greek world. Some scholars suggested that invading groups overwhelmed the Mycenaean kingdoms, bringing an end to the old order. At first glance, the theory seemed reasonable. Destruction layers existed. Political systems collapsed. New cultural patterns emerged. Yet the evidence proved more complicated than expected. Different sites experienced different fates. Some were destroyed violently. Others appear to have declined gradually. A few survived longer than others. The pattern did not resemble a single coordinated conquest sweeping across the region. Instead, the collapse appeared fragmented and uneven. Attention soon turned toward other possibilities. Could environmental pressures have played a role? Scientific studies suggest that parts of the eastern Mediterranean experienced periods of climatic instability around this time. Drought may have reduced agricultural production. Food shortages could have strained societies dependent upon complex systems of administration and trade. A prolonged crisis might weaken kingdoms from within. Palaces that relied upon collecting resources, managing labor, and distributing supplies could become increasingly vulnerable. Yet climate alone struggles to explain every aspect of the collapse. The destruction remains too varied, the evidence too complex. Another theory focuses on the interconnected nature of the Bronze Age world. As we have already seen in earlier mysteries, the Mycenaeans were not isolated. They participated in an international system stretching across the Mediterranean and Near East. Goods flowed between regions. Diplomats exchanged messages. Kingdoms depended upon one another in ways that modern observers sometimes underestimate. But interconnected systems possess a hidden weakness. When enough parts begin to fail, the entire structure can become unstable. If trade routes were disrupted, essential materials might become scarce. Political alliances could weaken. Economies might suffer. Local crises could spread outward, creating wider instability. Some historians believe the Mycenaean collapse was part of the broader Bronze Age crisis that affected numerous civilizations around 1200 BC. If so, the disappearance of the Mycenaeans was not an isolated event. It was one chapter in a much larger story. Yet, even this explanation leaves unanswered questions. Why did the palace system collapse so thoroughly? Why were administrative centers abandoned? And why did literacy largely disappear from Greece for centuries afterward? The loss of writing is particularly striking. The Mycenaeans used a script known today as Linear B. Thousands of administrative records were created using this writing system. After the collapse, however, literacy appears to have declined dramatically. For generations, writing vanished from much of the region. Imagine an entire civilization losing not only its political institutions, but also its written memory. The effect was profound. Historians sometimes refer to the period that followed as part of the Greek Dark Age, not because nothing happened, but because surviving evidence becomes much scarcer. The palaces were gone. The records were gone. The old world had disappeared, and yet traces remained. One of the most fascinating aspects of the mystery involves the possible connection between the Mycenaeans and later Greek legends. By the time poets composed epic traditions such as those associated with the Trojan War, centuries had passed since the collapse of the Bronze Age kingdoms. Memories of the Mycenaean world may have survived only as distant echoes. Stories changed, details blurred, history merged with legend. Could the tales of mighty kings, fortified cities, and heroic conflicts preserve fragments of real events from the Mycenaean age? Many historians believe at least some elements may reflect genuine memories transformed through generations of oral tradition. If so, the disappearance of the civilization was so profound that it passed from history into myth. As with many enduring mysteries, more speculative theories have emerged over time. Some researchers have proposed widespread internal rebellions. Others suggest that pirate activity and maritime warfare disrupted trade networks beyond recovery. A few theories emphasize earthquakes, arguing that repeated seismic disasters may have weakened critical centers of power. Each explanation addresses part of the puzzle. None solves it completely. The truth may involve multiple causes working together: political instability, economic disruption, environmental stress, warfare, natural disasters, a combination of pressures that gradually overwhelmed a civilization once thought secure. Perhaps that is what makes the mystery so compelling. The Mycenaeans did not simply vanish overnight. Their decline appears complex, layered, and deeply human. Powerful institutions that had endured for generations suddenly proved fragile. Systems that connected distant communities broke apart. A civilization that seemed permanent entered a period of transformation from which a very different world eventually emerged. Today, visitors can still walk among the ruins of Mycenaean citadels. They can stand before colossal walls, enter ancient tombs, and look across landscapes once ruled by Bronze Age kings. The stones remain, the people are gone, and many of their secrets remain buried alongside them. As archaeologists continue uncovering new evidence and re-examining old discoveries, the mystery persists. Each tablet, each ruined palace, and each layer of destruction adds another piece to the story while leaving crucial questions unanswered. And somewhere between history and legend lies the final chapter of the Mycenaean civilization, a chapter that may still be waiting beneath the soil of the Aegean world, hidden among the ruins of a vanished age. For now, one question continues to echo through the silent halls of their abandoned palaces. What truly caused the fall of the Mycenaeans, and how much of their lost world remains waiting to be rediscovered? If the fall of the Mycenaeans marked the end of one great Bronze Age civilization, the next mystery takes us even further back in time, to a culture that flourished centuries before the Mycenaean palaces rose to prominence. A civilization of seafarers, merchants, artists, and builders. A people whose magnificent palaces overlooked the Mediterranean long before many of their neighbors reached the height of their power. And a civilization whose decline remains one of the most debated mysteries in ancient history. This is the story of the Minoans. Across the island of Crete, the ruins of vast palace complexes still emerge from the landscape. Sunlight falls across colorful frescoes depicting dolphins, dancers, priests, and athletes. Corridors twist through labyrinthine chambers. Staircases descend into shadowed halls. Storage rooms stretch beneath massive walls built thousands of years ago. Even today, these ruins possess an almost dreamlike quality. It is easy to understand why later generations associated Crete with myths of labyrinths, kings, and hidden monsters. Yet behind the legends stood a very real civilization, and for centuries, it was among the most advanced societies in the Mediterranean world. The Minoans emerged during the Bronze Age and reached their height long before the rise of classical Greece. Centered on Crete, they developed extensive trade networks that connected them with Egypt, Anatolia, the Levant, and distant parts of the Mediterranean. Their ships crossed the sea carrying goods, ideas, and influence. Their artists created vibrant works unlike anything else in the ancient world. Their architects constructed enormous palace complexes such as Knossos, Phaistos, Malia, and Zakros. For a time, the Minoans appeared remarkably successful. Then something changed, and although the civilization did not disappear in a single dramatic moment, its decline remains surrounded by uncertainty. The mystery begins with one of the most powerful natural events of the ancient world. Around the middle of the 2nd millennium BC, a volcanic eruption occurred on the island of Thera, known today as Santorini. The eruption was colossal. Entire portions of the island were destroyed. Ash spread across vast distances, The explosion may have been among the largest volcanic events in human history. For historians and archaeologists, the question seems obvious. Did the eruption destroy the Minoan civilization? At first glance, the theory appears convincing. Thera lies relatively close to Crete. A volcanic event of such magnitude would almost certainly have affected surrounding regions. Tsunamis may have struck coastal settlements. Trade routes may have been disrupted. Agricultural systems could have suffered. For many years, the eruption was viewed as the primary explanation for the disappearance of the Minoans. Yet the evidence gradually revealed a more complicated story. Archaeological discoveries suggest that Minoan civilization survived the eruption itself. Palaces continued functioning. Communities remained occupied. Trade appears to have persisted. The civilization was clearly affected, but not necessarily destroyed. This realization transformed the mystery. If the eruption did not directly end Minoan civilization, then what happened? Some researchers propose that the eruption weakened the Minoans, creating vulnerabilities that became increasingly significant over time. A society dependent upon maritime trade could struggle after major disruptions to shipping networks. Coastal settlements damaged by tsunamis might require years to recover. Economic losses could gradually undermine political stability. In this view, the eruption was not the final blow. It was the beginning of a longer process. Then there is the question of the Mycenaeans. As Minoan influence declined, Mycenaean power appears to have expanded. Archaeological evidence indicates increasing Mycenaean presence on Crete during the later stages of Minoan history. Administrative systems changed. Cultural influences shifted. Eventually, Mycenaean control became evident at major centers such as Knossos. Did the Mycenaeans conquer the Minoans? Possibly. But even here, certainty remains elusive. The evidence does not point clearly toward a single dramatic invasion. Instead, the transition may have occurred gradually through a combination of political influence, economic pressure, migration, and military power. The process remains difficult to reconstruct. Many of the details have been lost. Another mystery concerns the Minoans themselves. Despite decades of research, their language remains only partially understood. The civilization used several writing systems, including one known as Linear A. Unlike Linear B, which was later deciphered and shown to represent an early form of Greek, Linear A remains undeciphered. This creates an extraordinary situation. Thousands of years later, we can admire Minoan art. We can study their architecture. We can examine their trade networks. Yet much of their own written voice remains silent. What stories did they record? What myths did they tell? What explanations did they offer for the events shaping their world? The answers may exist within inscriptions that modern scholars still cannot fully read. The inability to decipher Linear A has transformed the disappearance of the Minoans into a deeper mystery. It is difficult to understand a civilization completely when its language remains partly hidden. Every undeciphered text becomes a locked door. Every inscription becomes a question waiting for an answer. As often happens with ancient mysteries, more speculative theories have emerged over time. Some writers have connected the Minoans to legends of lost civilizations. Others have suggested that memories of Minoan Crete influenced stories later associated with Atlantis. The timing of the Thera eruption, combined with the sophistication of Minoan culture, has encouraged comparisons that continue to attract attention. Most historians remain cautious about such connections. The evidence is intriguing but far from conclusive. Yet these theories reveal something important. The Minoans continue to capture the imagination because they seem both familiar and distant. Their art feels vibrant and alive. Their palaces feel sophisticated and surprisingly modern, and yet their disappearance remains difficult to explain with complete confidence. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the mystery is that the civilization did not vanish entirely. Elements of Minoan culture survived. Influences persisted. Ideas spread. The people themselves did not simply disappear. Instead, the world they created gradually transformed into something else. And that transformation remains difficult to trace. The palaces fell into ruin. The writing system faded from use. Political authority shifted. A civilization that once dominated the Aegean slowly passed into history. Yet traces remain everywhere. In the frescoes still visible on palace walls, in the artifacts recovered from ancient settlements, in the myths that later generations told about Crete, and perhaps in texts that have yet to be deciphered. As archaeologists continue excavating Minoan sites and linguists search for clues hidden within Linear A inscriptions, the mystery endures. Every discovery reveals new details about a civilization of remarkable sophistication while raising new questions about its decline. And somewhere beneath the ruins of Crete, hidden within forgotten archives or buried beneath layers of earth and stone, there may still be evidence capable of explaining what truly happened to the Minoans. Until then, their story remains suspended between history and legend, a civilization that shaped the ancient Mediterranean, yet whose final transformation remains one of the most fascinating mysteries of the Bronze Age. And as the winds move through the silent corridors of their abandoned palaces, one question continues to linger. Did the Minoans fall because of natural disaster, foreign influence, internal change, or a combination of forces we still do not fully understand? And how much of their lost world remains waiting to be uncovered? If the Minoans left behind undeciphered texts that continue to conceal their secrets, the next mystery centers on a different kind of silence. Not the silence of a lost language, but the silence that falls over a royal family whose story suddenly disappears from the historical record. In the ruins of Akhetaten, beneath the desert sun, archaeologists have uncovered countless images of a remarkable royal household. Carved into stone walls and painted across palace chambers are scenes unlike almost any other in Egyptian history. A king and queen stand together beneath the rays of the Aten. Their children play at their feet. Princesses embrace their parents. Family life unfolds with an intimacy rarely depicted in ancient royal art. For a brief moment, these daughters of Pharaoh Akhenaten seemed destined to occupy the center of Egypt's future. Then they vanished. And what became of them remains one of the most intriguing mysteries of the Amarna period. The story begins in the royal city of Akhetaten, the purpose-built capital established by Akhenaten during the 14th century BC. Here, the pharaoh, his queen Nefertiti, and their daughters appeared constantly in official artwork. Unlike many earlier Egyptian royal families, Akhenaten's household was represented with unusual frequency. The princesses were not hidden figures existing only in the background of history. They appeared prominently in reliefs, inscriptions, and ceremonial scenes. Their names are known: Meritaten, Meketaten, Ankesenpaaten, Nefer-Neferuaten Tasherit, Nefer-Neferure, Setepenre. Together, they formed one of the most visible royal families in Egyptian history. Yet visibility would not guarantee remembrance. As the Amarna period came to an end, the historical trail grows increasingly uncertain. One of the earliest mysteries concerns Meketaten. Among the daughters, she appears to have held an important position within the royal household. Then, suddenly, references to her cease. A royal tomb at Amarna contains scenes that many scholars interpret as connected to her death. In these images, members of the royal family appear engaged in mourning rituals. But what exactly happened? Did she die from illness? Complications related to childbirth, as some theories suggest? Or another cause entirely? The surviving evidence remains frustratingly ambiguous. The tomb scenes provide clues, yet their precise meaning continues to be debated. Meketaten emerges from the historical record briefly, then disappears into uncertainty. She would not be the last. The fate of Akhetaten presents another puzzle. As the eldest daughter, she occupied a particularly significant position. During the later years of Akhenaten's reign, her prominence increased dramatically. Her name appears in important inscriptions. Some evidence suggests she may have assumed responsibilities normally associated with queenship. Then the records become difficult to interpret. Certain inscriptions hint that she may have remained influential after Akhenaten's death. Some scholars have proposed that she briefly held extraordinary authority during the chaotic transition that followed. Could she have exercised political power behind the scenes? Did she participate in governing Egypt during one of its most uncertain periods? Or did she simply fade from prominence as new rulers emerged? No definitive answer has survived. Perhaps the most famous daughter is Ankhesenpaten, later known as Ankhesenamun. Unlike several of her sisters, she did not disappear immediately from the historical record. She is best known today as the wife of Tutankhamun, the young pharaoh whose mysterious death continues to fascinate historians. Yet even her story ends in uncertainty. Following Tutankhamun's death, evidence suggests she found herself in a precarious position. One extraordinary document, preserved in Hittite records, describes an Egyptian queen requesting a foreign prince as a husband. The letter is remarkable. The queen reportedly claimed she had no suitable heir and sought assistance from a foreign ruler. A prince was dispatched, but he never arrived. According to the records, he died before reaching Egypt. After that, Ankhesenamun largely disappears from history. What became of her? Did she remarry? Was she drawn into political struggles surrounding the succession? Did she live quietly beyond the attention of official records? The answers remain unknown. Then there are the younger daughters. Neferneferuaten Tasherit, Neferneferura, and Setapenri gradually vanish from surviving inscriptions during the final years of the Amarna period. Many historians suspect that illness may have claimed some of them at a young age. Ancient Egypt was no stranger to disease. Even royal status offered limited protection against epidemics, infections, or other health crises. Yet direct evidence is scarce. The disappearance of these princesses may reflect tragedy, or simply the incomplete nature of the surviving record. In many cases, historians are forced to work with silence, and silence can be difficult to interpret. The mystery deepens because the entire Amarna period occupies an unusual place within Egyptian history. Following Akhenaten's death, efforts appear to have been made to distance Egypt from his religious reforms. Temples associated with Aten lost their privileged status. Traditional beliefs returned. The royal city of Akhetaten was abandoned. Names connected to the Amarna experiment were sometimes omitted, altered, or ignored in later records. This process complicates efforts to reconstruct what happened to Akhenaten's daughters. How many documents were lost? How many inscriptions were destroyed? How many details vanished because later generations preferred not to remember that chapter of Egyptian history? The possibility is difficult to ignore. Some researchers have even suggested that important clues may once have existed in archives that no longer survive. As often happens with ancient mysteries, more speculative theories have emerged. One of the most debated involves the identity of Neferneferuaten, a ruler whose name appears during the turbulent years following Akhenaten's reign. Some scholars have proposed that this figure may have been Nefertiti. Others have suggested Akhetaten. If true, one of Akhenaten's daughters may have exercised royal authority at the highest level. Yet the evidence remains incomplete. The identity of Neferneferuaten continues to provoke discussion among Egyptologists. Other theories imagine hidden political rivalries, secret marriages, or power struggles concealed behind the fragmentary records that survive. Most remain impossible to verify. Yet they highlight how much uncertainty still surrounds the final years of the Amarna family. Perhaps that is what makes this mystery so compelling. Unlike forgotten kings known only from damaged inscriptions, Akhenaten's daughters once stood at the very center of royal life. Their faces appear in artwork. Their names survive in monuments. Their lives unfolded within one of history's most unusual royal courts. And yet their ultimate fates remain elusive. The desert preserved fragments of their story, not the ending. Today, archaeologists continue searching for new tombs, inscriptions, and clues hidden beneath the sands of Egypt. Each discovery offers the possibility of illuminating another piece of the puzzle. Until then, the daughters of Akhenaten remain suspended between visibility and disappearance, among the best-known figures of the Amarna period, yet also among its greatest mysteries. And somewhere beneath the sands that once surrounded the abandoned city of Akhetaten, one question may still await an answer. What truly happened to the daughters of Egypt's most enigmatic royal family after the world they knew came to an end? If the disappearance of Akhenaten's daughters reminds us how entire lives can vanish from the historical record, the next mystery takes us beneath the surface itself, into dark passages carved through stone, hidden chambers buried below ancient cities, and underground spaces whose true purpose remains uncertain even today. Across the former lands of the Hittite Empire, archaeologists have uncovered a series of unusual subterranean structures. Some lie beneath fortifications, others appear near temples or sacred areas. A few descend into darkness through carefully constructed stone passages, disappearing beneath the earth before ending in chambers whose purpose remains difficult to explain. For centuries, these spaces remained hidden, and even now they continue to raise questions. What were they built for? Who used them? And why did the Hittites invest so much effort in creating places that seem designed to disappear beneath the world above? The mystery begins in the rugged heartlands of ancient Anatolia. The landscape is dominated by rocky hills, windswept plateaus, and valleys that have witnessed thousands of years of human history. Here stood Hattusa, the capital of the Hittite Empire, one of the most powerful kingdoms of the late Bronze Age. At its height, the city was protected by impressive walls, monumental gates, and elaborate defensive systems. Yet among these visible achievements, archaeologists discovered something less obvious. Beneath parts of the city lay underground passages. Some were narrow and enclosed. Others were carefully lined with stone blocks. Many led through hidden routes beneath fortifications. At first glance, their purpose seemed straightforward. Perhaps they were military structures, secret exits, protected passageways allowing defenders to move unseen during a siege. The theory made sense. Ancient cities often required defensive innovations, and the Hittites were skilled engineers. Yet as additional discoveries emerged, the picture became more complicated. Not every underground structure appeared purely military. Some chambers occupied locations associated with religious activity. Others seemed too elaborate for simple emergency escape routes. A number of passages appeared connected to symbolic or ceremonial spaces rather than practical defensive systems. This raises a fascinating possibility. What if some of these underground structures served a purpose beyond warfare? To understand the mystery, it helps to consider the Hittite worldview. The Hittites lived in a universe populated by gods, spirits, and supernatural forces. Their religious traditions were remarkably complex, incorporating influences from many neighboring cultures. Rituals governed every aspect of life, from diplomacy and agriculture to illness and warfare. In Hittite texts, references frequently appear to the underworld. Like many ancient civilizations, the Hittites believed in realms that existed beyond ordinary human perception. The earth itself could function as a boundary between worlds. Openings in the ground were not always viewed as simple geological features. Sometimes they carried spiritual significance. This context has led some researchers to examine the underground chambers from a different perspective. Could they have played a role in religious ceremonies? Could these dark passages have symbolized journeys into sacred realms beneath the earth? The idea becomes particularly intriguing when considering certain ritual texts. Some Hittite ceremonies involved symbolic acts of transfer, purification, or communication with divine powers. Ritual objects were occasionally deposited in special locations. Certain ceremonies appear to reference gateways between worlds. Although direct evidence remains limited, some scholars have wondered whether underground spaces formed part of these practices. Imagine descending into one of these chambers more than 3,000 years ago. The sunlight fades. The air becomes cooler. Stone walls close in around the narrow passage. The sounds of the city disappear. In such an environment, the boundary between ordinary and sacred experience may have felt remarkably thin. Was that intentional? The question remains open. Another mystery involves the extraordinary care with which some of these structures were built. Creating subterranean chambers required significant labor and planning. Workers had to excavate stone, stabilize walls, and ensure structural integrity. Such efforts suggest that these spaces mattered. But why? If they served only occasional military functions, why invest so heavily in their construction? The answer may lie in the possibility that they fulfilled multiple roles. Some structures could have combined practical and symbolic purposes. A passageway useful during a siege might also carry religious significance. A hidden chamber could function as both a secure space and a ceremonial location. Ancient societies rarely separated the practical and spiritual as neatly as modern observers sometimes do. For the Hittites, defense, kingship, religion, and cosmology were often deeply intertwined. The mystery deepens when examining structures discovered beyond Hattusa itself. Other Hittite sites contain subterranean features that do not fit neatly into any single category. Some appear isolated from obvious defensive systems. Others occupy locations whose significance remains uncertain. Patterns begin to emerge, but the overall picture remains incomplete. Part of the challenge lies in the fragmentary nature of the evidence. The Hittite Empire collapsed around 1200 BC during the wider upheavals that affected much of the eastern Mediterranean. Cities were abandoned, archives were lost, buildings fell into ruin. Many explanations that once existed may have vanished along with the civilization itself. Archaeologists are left attempting to reconstruct meaning from architecture alone. And architecture, while revealing, does not always explain intent. As often happens with ancient mysteries, more speculative ideas have emerged over time. Some researchers have proposed that certain underground chambers were connected to ancestor worship. Others suggest they may have functioned as places of initiation, where participants underwent rituals removed from public view. There are also theories involving sacred storage, ceremonial processions, or symbolic recreations of mythological journeys. Most remain difficult to prove, yet none can be dismissed entirely. The underground spaces continue to resist simple interpretation. Particularly intriguing are passages associated with monumental architecture. Why place hidden chambers near structures intended to display royal power? Why create concealed spaces beneath locations designed to be seen? Perhaps the answer reflects a worldview in which visible authority depended upon invisible forces. Kings ruled above ground. Gods and spirits influenced events from below. The two realms may have been understood as interconnected. This possibility gains additional weight when considering ancient concepts of sacred geography. In many cultures, caves, springs, and underground spaces were viewed as liminal places, locations where communication between worlds became possible. The Hittites may have shared similar beliefs. If so, the chambers beneath their cities were not merely architectural features. They were thresholds, places where ritual and reality intersected. Yet certainty remains elusive. Even today, Archaeologists continue discovering new details about these structures. Improved surveys reveal hidden passages. Excavations uncover previously unknown chambers. Advances in technology allow researchers to examine features that earlier generations could not fully explore. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. Each discovery also raises new questions. What ceremonies occurred within these spaces? Who was permitted to enter them? Were they used regularly or only during extraordinary occasions? Did they serve the living, the dead, the gods, or all three? The answers remain buried within the silence of stone. Perhaps that silence is what makes the mystery so compelling. Unlike lost treasures or vanished rulers, these underground chambers still exist. Their walls remain standing. Their passages remain accessible. We can walk where ancient priests, officials, or soldiers once walked. And yet their purpose remains partly concealed. The structures have survived. Their meaning has not. As shadows gather within the ancient tunnels and the light of the surface world fades behind us, it becomes easy to understand why these places continue to inspire curiosity. They seem designed not merely to shelter people, but to evoke something deeper, a sense of crossing a boundary between the known and the unknown. And somewhere beneath the ruins of the Hittite world, beyond the reach of certainty and interpretation, one question continues to linger in the darkness. Were these underground chambers practical creations of a powerful empire, sacred gateways to unseen realms, or something far more complex that modern archaeology has yet to fully uncover? If the underground chambers of the Hittites leave us wondering about hidden rituals and forgotten meanings beneath ancient cities, the next mystery concerns symbols that traveled across the sea itself, enigmatic marks impressed into metal, carried aboard merchant vessels, and preserved for thousands of years without revealing exactly what they were meant to say. They appear simple at first glance. A line, a cross, a geometric shape, a collection of carefully engraved signs. Yet these markings may represent one of the most overlooked mysteries of the Bronze Age: the undeciphered symbols found on Cypriot bronze ingots. Imagine standing on the shore of the eastern Mediterranean around the 13th century BC. The sea is crowded with activity. Merchant ships arrive and depart from busy harbors. Sailors load cargo into wooden vessels bound for distant kingdoms. Traders negotiate prices. Officials record transactions. Copper, the lifeblood of the Bronze Age economy, moves from one shore to another in enormous quantities. At the center of this vast network stood the island of Cyprus. Few places were more important to the Bronze Age world. The island possessed rich copper deposits, and copper was essential. Combined with tin, it produced bronze, the material from which weapons, tools, armor, and countless other objects were made. Without copper, the Bronze Age could not function, and for centuries, Cyprus supplied much of it. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of this trade across the Mediterranean. Copper ingots from Cyprus have been found in shipwrecks, settlements, and ancient ports hundreds of miles from their place of origin. Many of these ingots share a distinctive shape. Known today as oxhide ingots, they resemble stretched animal hides, with projecting corners that may have made them easier to transport. They are among the most recognizable artifacts of the late Bronze Age. Yet some carry something even more intriguing: symbols, marks, signs impressed or engraved into the metal before it left the workshops. And despite decades of study, their meaning remains uncertain. At first, the symbols may seem insignificant. After all, manufacturers mark products all the time. Perhaps the marks simply identified a workshop, a merchant, a destination, an owner. But the deeper researchers examine the evidence, the more complicated the mystery becomes. Some symbols resemble characters known from ancient writing systems. Others appear unique. Certain marks occur repeatedly. Others are rare. A few seem almost pictorial, while others are abstract and geometric. The variety suggests intention. These were not random scratches. Someone placed them there deliberately. The question is, why? The most widely accepted explanation views the symbols as practical markings connected to trade and administration. The Bronze Age economy was highly organized. Large quantities of copper moved between regions, and managing such trade required systems of identification and control. The marks may have functioned as ownership symbols, merchant signatures, accounting references, indicators of production centers. In this interpretation, the symbols represent a form of administrative shorthand, simple, useful, and practical. Yet even this seemingly straightforward explanation leaves important questions unanswered. Why do some symbols resemble writing while others do not? Why are certain signs distributed across large geographic areas? And why do some markings appear in contexts that suggest significance beyond mere bookkeeping? The mystery deepens when considering how little we know about several Bronze Age writing systems. Cyprus itself possessed ancient scripts that remain only partially understood. Nearby regions used multiple forms of writing, some fully deciphered, others still mysterious. The Mediterranean of the late Bronze Age was a world of languages, cultures, and symbols interacting constantly. Could the marks on the ingots represent fragments of a lost communication system? Could they belong to traditions that have vanished entirely? It is a possibility that continues to intrigue researchers. One particularly fascinating question involves literacy itself. Modern people often assume that writing must be lengthy and complex. Yet many ancient societies used symbols that conveyed information without forming complete written texts. A single mark could identify an institution, a ruler, a trading house, a religious authority. The symbols on the ingots may have communicated meaning immediately to Bronze Age merchants while appearing almost incomprehensible to modern observers. Imagine a ship arriving in a foreign harbor. Workers unload dozens of copper ingots. An official glances at a symbol impressed into the metal and instantly understands its significance. 3,000 years later, that same symbol survives. The official's knowledge does not. The sign remains. Its meaning disappears. The challenge facing archaeologists is that symbols rarely come with explanations. An inscription can sometimes be translated. A symbol often cannot. Its meaning depends upon context, and much of that context has been lost. The destruction and upheaval that swept across the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BC may have contributed significantly to this loss. Kingdoms collapsed, trade networks fractured, archives vanished, entire systems of administration disappeared. If records once explained the symbols, those records may no longer exist. The signs survived. The key to understanding them may not have. Some researchers have proposed that the marks functioned as early commercial branding. Just as modern manufacturers place logos on products, Bronze Age producers may have used symbols to identify the origin or quality of copper shipments. The theory has merit. Trade depended upon trust and reputation. Recognizable symbols could have provided valuable information to buyers. Yet proving such a theory remains difficult. The evidence allows multiple interpretations. Others have suggested religious significance. Copper held immense economic importance, but ancient societies often viewed valuable materials through both practical and spiritual lenses. Rituals accompanied mining, metalworking, and trade in many cultures. Could some symbols represent divine protection? Blessings for safe transport? Associations with particular deities? Again, certainty remains elusive. The possibility cannot be ruled out entirely. Then there are the more speculative ideas. A few researchers have wondered whether some symbols preserve traces of scripts that have otherwise disappeared from history. Others have suggested that the marks reflect interactions between multiple cultures operating within a shared commercial system. In this view, the ingots become more than cargo. They become evidence of communication across linguistic and political boundaries. Tiny clues to a world that was far more interconnected than once imagined. What makes the mystery especially compelling is the role copper played within Bronze Age civilization itself. These ingots were not obscure objects. They were among the most important commodities of their era. Weapons depended upon them. Tools depended upon them. Economies depended upon them. The symbols attached to such valuable cargo were unlikely to be meaningless. Someone cared enough to place them there. Someone expected others to understand them. Yet the intended audience vanished thousands of years ago. Their knowledge disappeared with them. Today, archaeologists continue studying the symbols using increasingly sophisticated techniques. Patterns are analyzed. Distribution maps are created. Comparisons are made with ancient scripts and trade systems throughout the Mediterranean. Each discovery provides new clues. Each clue opens new possibilities. Yet the mystery endures. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of these symbols is their simplicity. Unlike monumental inscriptions carved into palace walls, these marks are small and easily overlooked. They were never intended to impress future generations. They were practical objects moving through everyday systems of commerce. And yet they have become messages from a vanished world. Messages that survived. Messages that can still be seen. Messages that can no longer be read with confidence. As the centuries pass and researchers continue searching for answers, the symbols remain silent companions to the copper ingots that once crossed the Mediterranean aboard merchant ships. They are reminders that even in an age connected by trade, diplomacy, and communication, some forms of knowledge can disappear completely. And somewhere within those simple marks, pressed into metal before the collapse of kingdoms and the fading of ancient networks, there may still be a forgotten story waiting to be understood. Until then, the symbols remain suspended between language and mystery, challenging us to decipher meanings that once seemed obvious to the people who created them. And as we examine those ancient signs etched into Bronze Age copper, one question continues to linger across the centuries. Were they merely practical marks of commerce, or do they preserve fragments of a lost system of knowledge that the modern world has yet to rediscover? If the symbols etched into Bronze Age copper remind us how meaning can be lost while the object itself survives, the next mystery concerns something far larger. Massive stone figures that once stood watch over a sacred place, their purpose hidden behind centuries of silence. In the rolling hills of northern Syria, amid ancient ruins weathered by wind and time, stood a temple unlike many others in the ancient Near East. Its stone walls were decorated with lions, sphinxes, and intricate reliefs. Massive basalt blocks formed impressive gateways. Visitors approaching the sanctuary would have been confronted by imagery designed to inspire awe, reverence, and perhaps even a measure of fear. This was the temple of Ain Dara, and among its most intriguing features were the giant statues and colossal carvings associated with the sacred complex. Who were these enormous figures meant to represent? Why were they placed here? And what message were they intended to communicate to those who entered the temple more than 3,000 years ago? The mystery begins with the temple itself. Constructed during the early 1st millennium BC, Ain Dara stood within a region that inherited traditions from many earlier civilizations, including the Hittites and the kingdoms that emerged after the collapse of the Bronze Age world. The temple occupied a prominent position overlooking the surrounding landscape, suggesting that it served as an important religious center. Even in its ruined state, the structure conveys a remarkable sense of grandeur. Visitors would have ascended a monumental staircase before passing through elaborately decorated entrances. Stone carvings lined the walls. Mythological creatures guarded key locations. Every element appears carefully designed to create an atmosphere of sacred significance. Yet among all these features, one discovery has generated particular fascination: gigantic footprints. Carved directly into the stone floor near the entrance and extending deeper into the temple complex, these footprints are far larger than those of any human being. Each measures well over a meter in length. To modern eyes, they appear almost surreal, as though an enormous being had approached the sanctuary and stepped inside. The effect is striking, and it raises immediate questions. Who, or what, was supposed to have left these footprints? The most widely accepted explanation is symbolic. Many scholars believe the footprints represented the presence of a deity. In ancient religious architecture, gods were often imagined as physically inhabiting their temples. The giant footprints may have served as a visual reminder that the sacred space belonged not merely to priests or worshippers, but to a divine being whose presence transcended ordinary human scale. In this interpretation, visitors entering the temple would symbolically follow in the footsteps of a god. The imagery would have reinforced the sacred nature of the sanctuary. Yet even this explanation leaves room for mystery. Which deity? What specific beliefs were associated with these carvings? And why was such an unusual artistic approach chosen? The surviving evidence provides clues but not complete answers. The temple contains iconography associated with powerful divine figures. Lions appear prominently throughout the complex, often serving as symbols of strength, authority, and supernatural protection. Sphinx-like creatures occupy important positions. Reliefs depict scenes that likely held religious meaning for ancient worshippers. Together, these elements suggest a carefully constructed symbolic landscape. Nothing appears accidental. Every carving, every statue, every architectural detail seems intended to communicate something. The challenge is that the people who understood those messages are long gone. Their interpretations vanished with them. The giant statues associated with the temple add another layer to the mystery. Fragments recovered from the site indicate the presence of imposing stone figures that once formed part of the temple's visual program. Some likely represented divine beings. Others may have served as guardian figures positioned at entrances or sacred thresholds. Such guardians were common throughout the ancient Near East, but their purpose may have extended beyond simple decoration. Ancient people often viewed temple guardians as active protectors of sacred spaces. These figures occupied the boundary between the human and divine worlds. They warned intruders, repelled hostile forces, marked transitions from ordinary space into holy ground. To modern observers, they appear as sculptures. To ancient worshippers, they may have possessed a far deeper significance. Were the statues symbolic, protective, ceremonial, or all of these at once? The answer remains uncertain. The mystery deepens when considering how little is known about the religious practices carried out at Ain Dara. Archaeologists can reconstruct portions of the architecture. They can analyze artistic motifs. They can compare the temple with similar structures from neighboring cultures. Yet ritual itself is often difficult to recover. Ceremonies leave fewer traces than buildings. Beliefs leave fewer traces than stone. As a result, much of what occurred within the temple remains hidden. Imagine approaching Ain Dara during a religious festival. Torches illuminate the entrance. Priests move through the sanctuary. Incense drifts into the evening air. Music echoes across the temple courtyard. Towering statues loom above the gathering. Gigantic footprints guide the eye toward the sacred interior. The experience would have been carefully choreographed, every visual element contributing to an atmosphere of wonder. But what emotions were visitors meant to feel? Reverence, fear, comfort, a sense of divine protection? Or perhaps all of these simultaneously? Without written explanations, certainty remains elusive. Some researchers have suggested that the footprints and colossal imagery were intended to emphasize the overwhelming power of the deity associated with the temple. By portraying divine beings on a scale far exceeding human dimensions, The temple communicated a clear message. Humans were small. The gods were immense. The sacred world operated according to a different order. This interpretation fits well with broader traditions throughout the ancient Near East. Yet alternative possibilities continue to be discussed. Could the footprints have represented a specific mythological event? A ceremonial procession of a deity? A symbolic journey reenacted during rituals? Certain scholars have wondered whether visitors may have participated in ceremonies connected to the footprints, though direct evidence remains limited. As with many ancient mysteries, intriguing possibilities exist alongside frustrating gaps in knowledge. More speculative theories occasionally emerge as well. Some observers have interpreted the giant footprints literally, imagining connections to ancient legends involving giants or supernatural beings. Such interpretations tend to fall outside mainstream archaeological scholarship, which generally favors symbolic explanations. Yet the persistence of these ideas reveals something important. The carvings possess a strange power even today. They invite questions. They encourage imagination. They create the impression that something enormous once passed through the temple gates. Whether symbolic or literal, the visual effect remains remarkably effective thousands of years later. The temple itself adds further complexity. Ain Dara existed within a region shaped by centuries of cultural exchange. Traditions from earlier Hittite kingdoms blended with newer influences. Religious ideas evolved. Artistic styles merged and transformed. The giant statues may therefore reflect multiple layers of meaning rather than a single interpretation. A guardian figure might simultaneously represent political authority, divine protection, mythological tradition, and ritual symbolism. Ancient art often operated on several levels at once. What appears straightforward from a modern perspective may have carried rich meanings for ancient audiences. Unfortunately, many of those meanings are now inaccessible. Time has preserved the stones, not the explanations. Today, the surviving remains of Ain Dara continue to fascinate archaeologists, historians, and visitors alike. Every carved lion, every fragment of sculpture, and every mysterious footprint offers another glimpse into a sacred world that is only partially understood. The temple speaks through architecture. It whispers through symbols, but it never fully explains itself. And perhaps that is why the mystery endures. Standing before the ruins, it is difficult not to wonder what ancient worshippers saw when they gazed upon those colossal figures. Did they view them as guardians, messengers, embodiments of divine power, or something even more profound? The answers may have vanished with the priests who served within the sanctuary and the pilgrims who once climbed its steps. Yet the giant statues and enormous footprints remain, silent and imposing, preserving questions that have survived for more than 3,000 years. And as shadows lengthen across the weathered stones of Ain Dara, one mystery continues to linger. Were these monumental creations simply artistic expressions of religious belief, or do they preserve fragments of sacred meanings that the modern world has only begun to glimpse? If the colossal guardians of Ain Dara hint at forgotten beliefs preserved in stone, the next mystery emerges from objects much smaller in size, yet no less intriguing. Hidden within the sealed chambers of Egyptian royal tombs, among gold masks, ceremonial weapons, and sacred treasures, archaeologists have discovered items that seem strangely out of place. Objects crafted far beyond Egypt's borders, materials that originated hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away. Artifacts whose journeys remain only partially understood. Each one raises a fascinating question. How did these foreign objects find their way into the tombs of Egypt's rulers? And what forgotten stories of travel, diplomacy, trade, and human connection might they still contain? The mystery begins in the darkness of the royal tombs themselves. Deep beneath the desert, protected by layers of stone and sand, generations of pharaohs were buried alongside extraordinary collections of possessions. Ancient Egyptians believed that life continued after death, and rulers were provided with everything they might need in the next world: food, furniture, jewelry, weapons, religious objects, symbols of power. The tomb was not merely a burial place, it was a carefully assembled reflection of a king's world. For that reason, every object found within a royal tomb has the potential to reveal something about the civilization that placed it there. Yet some discoveries reveal more than expected. When archaeologists began studying certain artifacts, they realized that not all of them originated in Egypt. Some came from distant lands. Others were manufactured using imported materials. A few appear to have traveled through multiple kingdoms before finally reaching the hands of Egyptian royalty. These objects transformed royal tombs into archives of international connections, silent witnesses to a world far more interconnected than many once imagined. One of the most famous examples comes from the tomb of Tutankhamun. Among the thousands of objects discovered inside his burial chamber was a remarkable dagger. At first glance, it appeared similar to other ceremonial weapons. Yet scientific analysis revealed something extraordinary. The blade had been crafted from meteoritic iron. The metal originated not from earthly mines, but from material that had fallen from the sky. For ancient Egyptians, such a substance must have seemed profoundly mysterious. A metal literally associated with the heavens. How was it acquired? Where was it worked? Who possessed the knowledge necessary to transform celestial material into a royal weapon? The answers remain only partly understood. The dagger demonstrates how unusual and valuable foreign or exotic materials could become in royal contexts. Yet it is far from the only example. Across numerous Egyptian sites, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of imported goods originating from regions throughout the ancient Near East, the Mediterranean, Nubia, and beyond. Lapis lazuli arrived from distant Afghanistan. Cedar wood traveled from the mountains of the Levant. Silver often originated from regions outside Egypt. Ivory, precious stones, rare oils, and luxury goods moved across vast distances through networks that connected civilizations separated by deserts, mountains, and seas. The sheer scale of these exchanges is remarkable. Imagine a piece of lapis lazuli extracted from a mine thousands of miles away, transported across rugged terrain, passed through multiple hands, exchanged among merchants and officials, eventually arriving in Egypt, where it became part of a royal treasure destined to accompany a pharaoh into eternity. Every imported artifact carries a hidden journey. Most of those journeys have been lost. The mystery grows even deeper when considering objects whose origins remain uncertain. Some artifacts discovered in royal tombs display artistic styles that do not fit neatly within Egyptian traditions. Others combine elements from multiple cultures. Certain decorative motifs appear foreign, yet were adapted by Egyptian craftsmen. Were these diplomatic gifts, trade items, war trophies, family heirlooms passed between royal households? The evidence often refuses to provide a clear answer. Diplomatic correspondence from the late Bronze Age offers intriguing clues. Clay tablets discovered at Amarna reveal a world of international communication between kings. Rulers exchanged letters, negotiated alliances, and sent luxurious gifts to one another. Gold, silver, precious stones, exotic animals, chariots, textiles, and works of art crossed political boundaries as part of these relationships. In this context, foreign objects found in Egyptian tombs become more than imported goods. They become symbols of diplomacy, material evidence of friendships, rivalries, marriages, and negotiations between powerful kingdoms. Yet even here, questions remain. Which gifts carried political significance? Which represented genuine friendship? Which were intended to impress, manipulate, or influence? Ancient diplomacy was rarely simple. An object buried beside a pharaoh may have possessed meanings now impossible to recover. Another layer of mystery surrounds materials whose roots remain unclear. Trade networks connected distant civilizations, but the exact pathways used by merchants are not always known. Goods may have changed hands numerous times before reaching their final destinations. A craftsman creating a royal artifact might never have seen the land from which its raw materials originated. Likewise, a pharaoh buried with a treasured object may have known little about its complete journey. The artifact itself becomes the only surviving witness. Silent, incomplete, yet undeniably connected to distant worlds. Some discoveries challenge assumptions about the limits of ancient travel. Archaeological evidence increasingly suggests that Bronze Age and early Iron Age societies maintained contacts across surprisingly large distances. Maritime trade linked ports throughout the Mediterranean. Caravan routes crossed deserts. Rivers connected regions that might otherwise seem isolated. The foreign artifacts in Egyptian tombs provide tangible proof of these connections. They remind us that ancient civilizations were not self-contained worlds. They were participants in larger systems of exchange, networks that carried not only goods, but also ideas, technologies, artistic styles, and religious influences. Yet for every connection that can be traced, others remain obscure. Consider the case of objects whose exact place of manufacture remains uncertain. A decorative item may display features associated with several cultures simultaneously. Was it produced by an immigrant craftsman working in Egypt, created abroad specifically for an Egyptian customer, or manufactured in a border region where cultural influences naturally blended together? The answer is often impossible to determine. The object survives. Its story does not. As often happens with historical mysteries, more speculative theories occasionally emerge. Some researchers have wondered whether certain unusual artifacts point toward trade networks extending farther than traditionally assumed. Others suggest that lost intermediaries, forgotten ports, or undocumented routes may have played larger roles in ancient commerce than surviving evidence currently indicates. Most such ideas remain subjects of debate, yet they highlight an important reality. Our understanding of ancient exchange networks remains incomplete. New discoveries continue to reshape the picture. A single artifact can reveal an unexpected connection between distant regions. A chemical analysis can identify the source of a material previously assumed to be local. An inscription can transform an isolated object into evidence of international contact. Each discovery expands the map of the ancient world, and each expansion creates new mysteries. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of foreign artifacts in Egyptian royal tombs is the way they blur traditional boundaries. Modern maps divide civilizations into separate regions and cultures. The artifacts tell a different story. They reveal movement, interaction, exchange, a world where materials, objects, and ideas traveled across astonishing distances, a world connected by countless individual journeys now largely forgotten. Some of those journeys ended in royal tombs, a piece of cedar wood from distant mountains, a gemstone from a faraway mine, a crafted object produced in another kingdom. Each was placed beside a ruler and sealed within a chamber intended to last forever. The object remained. Its path vanished. Today, archaeologists continue analyzing ancient materials using increasingly sophisticated techniques. Chemical signatures reveal origins. Microscopic traces expose manufacturing methods. Scientific tools reconstruct connections invisible to earlier generations of researchers. Yet many questions remain unanswered. Why were certain foreign objects chosen for burial while others were not? What meanings did they hold for the individuals who selected them? How many ancient trade routes remain undiscovered? And how many journeys have been erased by time? As we stand inside the imagined darkness of a royal tomb, surrounded by treasures gathered from across the known world, it becomes clear that these artifacts represent more than wealth. They are fragments of forgotten relationships, echoes of distant lands, evidence that the ancient world was far larger, more connected, and perhaps more mysterious than we often assume. And somewhere among the countless objects still buried beneath desert sands, there may yet be discoveries capable of revealing entirely new chapters in the story. Until then, the foreign artifacts resting in Egyptian royal tombs continue to pose a compelling question. Were they merely luxury goods collected by powerful rulers, or are they silent clues to networks, journeys? If the foreign treasures buried beside Egyptian pharaohs reveal a world connected by trade, diplomacy, and long-distance exchange, the next mystery takes us to one of the key crossroads of that interconnected world, an island whose copper-fueled economies, whose ports linked distant kingdoms, and whose fortified settlements suddenly faced an uncertain future during one of history's most turbulent eras. Around 1200 BC, something happened on Cyprus. Across parts of the island, fortified settlements that had once seemed prepared for danger were abandoned, destroyed, or dramatically transformed. The walls remained. The people disappeared. And the reasons why remain a subject of ongoing debate. The mystery begins among the hills, valleys, and coastlines of ancient Cyprus. At first glance, the island appears ideally positioned for prosperity. Located between major regions of the eastern Mediterranean, it occupied a strategic position within maritime trade networks that connected Egypt, Anatolia, the Aegean, and the Levant. Ships carrying copper, luxury goods, ceramics, timber, and other commodities regularly crossed its waters. For centuries, Cyprus benefited from these connections. Its settlements grew, its trade expanded, its influence increased. Yet by the closing years of the Bronze Age, signs of instability began to appear. Archaeologists have identified several fortified sites dating to this turbulent period. Some were constructed in defensible locations. Others featured walls, towers, and architectural elements suggesting concern about security. The very existence of these fortifications raises an intriguing question. What were the inhabitants preparing for? Something had convinced communities that protection was necessary. Perhaps the danger was real. Perhaps it was anticipated. Either way, fear appears to have shaped the landscape. Then, in many cases, the settlements were abandoned. The pattern is striking. Some sites show evidence of destruction. Others reveal signs of sudden departure. A few appear to have been occupied only briefly before being left behind. The details vary from place to place, but the broader mystery remains. Why invest considerable effort in constructing defensible settlements only to abandon them shortly afterward? The timing is difficult to ignore. Around 1200 BC, the eastern Mediterranean entered a period of profound disruption. Powerful kingdoms collapsed. Trade networks fractured. Cities burned. Political systems that had endured for centuries suddenly faltered. The Hittite Empire disappeared. Major Mycenaean centers entered decline. Cities across the region experienced destruction or abandonment. The entire international system of the late Bronze Age seemed to be under extraordinary pressure. Cyprus stood directly within this zone of upheaval. One possibility is that the fortified settlements represent a response to growing insecurity. As regional stability weakened, communities may have sought protection behind walls. Settlements that had once relied upon wider political networks suddenly faced new uncertainties. Trade routes became less predictable. Alliances became less reliable. Threats may have become more immediate. In this interpretation, the fortifications were emergency measures, visible evidence of a society adapting to crisis. Yet if the defenses were meant to ensure survival, why were so many sites eventually abandoned? The question remains difficult to answer. One theory points toward invasion. For generations, historians connected the collapse of the Bronze Age world to movements of peoples across the Mediterranean. Ancient Egyptian records describe groups often referred to collectively as the Sea Peoples, mysterious populations who appeared during this era of instability. Some scholars have suggested that Cyprus may have experienced raids, migrations, or military attacks linked to these broader movements. The fortified settlements could reflect preparations for such threats. The subsequent abandonments might represent the consequences of conflict. The theory possesses a certain appeal. It fits the wider atmosphere of uncertainty surrounding the period. Yet the evidence remains incomplete. Not every site displays clear signs of warfare. Not every abandonment appears violent. And the identity of the groups involved remains debated. The Sea Peoples themselves remain one of the great mysteries of ancient history. As a result, invasion alone may not fully explain what occurred. Other researchers focus on economics. The prosperity of Bronze Age Cyprus depended heavily upon trade, particularly the production and export of copper. The island's fortunes were deeply tied to international exchange networks. But what happens when those networks begin to fail? A disruption in maritime commerce could have profound consequences. Demand for copper might decline. Trade routes could become dangerous. Supplies of essential goods might become difficult to obtain. Communities built around participation in a thriving international economy would suddenly face enormous challenges. In this scenario, the abandonment of fortified settlements may reflect economic collapse rather than military defeat. The walls remained intact. The system supporting life behind them did not. Then there is the possibility of environmental stress. Ancient societies depended heavily upon agriculture, water resources, and predictable climatic conditions. Even relatively modest changes could create significant difficulties over time. Some researchers have explored evidence suggesting periods of drought or environmental instability during the broader Bronze Age collapse. If agricultural productivity declined, communities may have faced increasing pressure. Food shortages, resource competition, population movement. These factors could contribute to abandonment even without warfare. Yet environmental explanations face familiar challenges. The evidence is often indirect. The effects varied across regions, and climate alone rarely explains complex historical transformations. Another possibility lies in the interaction of multiple crises occurring simultaneously. This increasingly popular perspective views the end of the Bronze Age not as a single catastrophe, but as a cascade of interconnected problems. Economic disruption weakens societies. Political instability follows. Migration increases. Conflict becomes more common. Environmental pressures intensify existing vulnerabilities. Systems already under strain begin to fail. From this perspective, the mystery of Cyprus cannot be separated from the wider collapse unfolding across the Mediterranean. The fortified settlements become snapshots of communities attempting to adapt to extraordinary circumstances. Some succeeded temporarily, others did not. The abandonment of these sites may represent the visible outcome of broader processes unfolding throughout the region. Yet even this explanation leaves room for uncertainty. Why were certain settlements abandoned while others survived? Why do some sites appear carefully organized while others suggest sudden disruption? And what happened to the people themselves? This final question may be the most intriguing. Abandoned settlements often encourage images of disappearance, but populations rarely vanish entirely. People move, adapt, resettle, transform. The inhabitants of these fortified communities likely continued their lives elsewhere. The challenge is determining where they went and how their experiences shaped the societies that followed. Archaeological evidence suggests significant cultural changes occurred on Cyprus during the transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. New influences appeared. Settlement patterns shifted. Political structures evolved. Some researchers see continuity beneath these changes. Others emphasize disruption. The debate continues. Part of the difficulty lies in the nature of the evidence itself. Archaeology excels at revealing what happened to buildings. It is often less successful at revealing what happened to emotions. Fear leaves few traces. Hope leaves even fewer. When people abandoned a fortified settlement, what were they thinking? Did they expect to return? Did they view the departure as temporary? Or did they know that a chapter of their history was ending forever? The stones cannot answer. As often happens with enduring mysteries, more speculative ideas occasionally emerge. Some have suggested the existence of undocumented conflicts or political rivalries that have left little trace in surviving records. Others imagine forgotten migrations, hidden alliances, or regional upheavals that remain invisible to modern researchers. Such theories are difficult to verify, yet they reflect an important reality. The surviving evidence remains incomplete. The story is still being reconstructed. Each excavation reveals another fragment. Each discovery introduces new possibilities. Perhaps that is what makes the abandoned settlements of Cyprus so compelling. Unlike legendary lost cities, these places are real. Their walls still stand. Their foundations remain visible. Their existence is not in doubt. The mystery lies in understanding why communities invested so much effort into defending them, only to leave them behind during one of the most chaotic periods in ancient history. Today, archaeologists continue excavating these sites, analyzing artifacts, studying environmental data, and comparing evidence from across the Mediterranean. Every new discovery contributes another piece to the puzzle. Yet the larger question remains unresolved. Were these settlements abandoned because of invasion, economic collapse, environmental stress, political turmoil, or some combination of forces working together? If the abandoned fortresses of Cyprus leave us wondering why entire communities walked away from places built for survival, the next mystery concerns something that was never abandoned after completion, because it was never completed at all. Hidden within the granite quarries of southern Egypt lie colossal monuments frozen in the moment of their creation, enormous projects interrupted by circumstances that remain only partly understood. They are the unfinished giant obelisks of Egypt's new kingdom, silent, immobile, still attached to the living rock from which they were meant to emerge. And more than 3,000 years later, they continue to raise questions about ambition, engineering, and the fragile line between success and failure in the ancient world. The story begins in the blazing heat of Aswan. Here, near the first cataract of the Nile, vast deposits of red granite rise from the earth. For thousands of years, Egyptian quarry workers extracted stone from this landscape to construct temples, statues, columns, sarcophagi, and obelisks. The granite of Aswan became one of the defining materials of Egyptian monumental architecture. Even today, the quarries bear the marks of ancient tools, grooves cut into stone, partially excavated blocks, abandoned projects, evidence of immense labor carried out under the relentless desert sun. Among these remains lies one of the most extraordinary unfinished monuments ever discovered, the so-called unfinished obelisk. Still connected to the bedrock, it stretches across the quarry floor like a sleeping giant. Had it been completed, it would likely have stood more than 40 meters tall and weighed well over 1,000 tons, making it the largest obelisk ever attempted in ancient Egypt. Its sheer size is difficult to comprehend. Standing beside it, a person appears insignificant. The monument seems almost impossible, and that is where the mystery begins. Why was such an enormous obelisk commissioned in the first place, and why was it never finished? Obelisks occupied a special place in Egyptian culture. These towering stone monuments were associated with the sun god and royal authority. They were symbols of divine power, political legitimacy, and cosmic order. Often erected in pairs at temple entrances, They transformed architecture into declarations of sacred and royal strength. During the New Kingdom, pharaohs competed to leave their mark upon the landscape through increasingly ambitious building programs. Temples expanded, statues grew larger, monuments became more elaborate. In this environment, the desire to create the largest obelisk ever seen seems entirely plausible. Yet ambition alone does not explain everything. Ancient Egyptian engineers were highly skilled. They had centuries of experience quarrying, transporting, and erecting massive stone monuments. The decision to begin work on such a colossal project was unlikely to have been made casually. The planners must have believed it could be completed. For a time, the project appears to have progressed successfully. Workers carefully isolated the obelisk from the surrounding rock using stone tools, probably dolerite pounding stones. They shaped the sides, refined the surface, and gradually revealed the monument hidden within the granite. The process required extraordinary precision. One mistake could prove catastrophic, and eventually, something went wrong. Near the end of the excavation process, a crack appeared within the stone. The flaw rendered the obelisk unusable. After years of labor, the project was abandoned. At least, that is the traditional explanation. The evidence certainly supports it. The crack remains visible today, cutting through the granite and revealing why the monument could not safely be transported or erected. For many historians, the mystery ends there. The stone fractured, the project failed, the workers moved on. Yet the story becomes more intriguing when viewed more closely. The unfinished obelisk was not the only monument left incomplete. Other abandoned obelisks and partially finished stone projects have been identified in Egyptian quarries. Together, they reveal a landscape filled with interrupted ambitions. Each represents a project that never reached its intended destination. Each poses its own questions. Was structural failure always the cause, or were other factors sometimes involved? Political change offers one possibility. The New Kingdom spanned centuries and included numerous rulers, each with their own priorities. Monumental construction often depended upon royal patronage. When a pharaoh died, projects associated with that ruler could lose support. A successor might redirect resources elsewhere. Construction programs could change abruptly. Administrative priorities could shift. In such circumstances, even massive undertakings might be abandoned before completion. The difficulty is proving such connections. Ancient records rarely explain why specific projects stopped. The monuments remain. The decisions behind them often do not. Economic considerations may have played a role as well. Large-scale construction demanded immense resources. Thousands of workers, skilled craftsmen, administrators, transport specialists, and support personnel contributed to these projects. Maintaining such efforts required political stability and access to wealth. Periods of military conflict, economic strain, or regional instability could potentially disrupt even the most ambitious plans. A monument intended to celebrate royal greatness might suddenly become impractical. The granite would remain in the quarry. The project would quietly end. There is also the question of transportation. Moving a completed giant obelisk would have represented an engineering challenge of astonishing complexity. The stone had to be detached, transported to the Nile, loaded onto specialized vessels, carried hundreds of kilometers in some cases, and finally erected at its destination. Egyptian engineers accomplished such feats repeatedly, yet a monument of unprecedented size may have approached practical limits. Could some projects have been abandoned because planners realized transportation would be too difficult? Most archaeologists remain cautious about this suggestion. Ancient builders consistently demonstrated capabilities that continue to impress modern observers. Still, the question lingers. How close did they come to the limits of their technology? And how often did those limits remain invisible because failed projects were abandoned before completion? The unfinished monuments provide rare glimpses into those moments. Unlike completed obelisks standing proudly before temples, abandoned examples preserve the process itself. Tool marks remain visible. Work stages can be reconstructed. Archaeologists can examine decisions frozen in time. In many ways, unfinished monuments reveal more than finished ones. They expose the challenges, the risks, the uncertainties, the human reality behind monumental achievement. Yet another layer of mystery emerges when considering the symbolic significance of incompletion. Ancient Egyptian culture placed enormous importance upon order, permanence, and continuity. Monuments were intended to endure for eternity. Their completion carried religious as well as political meaning. An unfinished obelisk represents something unusual, a disruption, a project interrupted before its purpose could be fulfilled. What did such abandonment mean to the people involved? Did workers view it as a disappointment, a practical necessity, an unfortunate but ordinary aspect of quarrying? The emotional dimension remains largely inaccessible. The stone preserves actions, not feelings. As with many ancient mysteries, more speculative theories occasionally appear. Some observers have wondered whether certain unfinished monuments reflect forgotten crises or dramatic events that left little trace in surviving records. Others have proposed connections to changes in religious practice, political upheaval, or administrative collapse. Most such ideas remain difficult to verify. The evidence rarely provides definitive answers, yet they persist because unfinished monuments invite questions. They embody potential rather than completion, possibility rather than certainty. Perhaps that is why they continue to fascinate modern audiences. A completed obelisk tells a story of success. An unfinished one tells a story interrupted before the ending was written. Standing within the quarry at Aswan, it is easy to imagine the scene thousands of years ago. The sound of pounding stones echoes across the granite. Dust fills the air. Teams of workers labor beneath the sun. The giant monument slowly emerges from the bedrock. Day after day, month after month, year after year. Then something changes. A crack appears. Orders are given. Work ceases. The workers leave. The monument remains. Centuries pass. Dynasties rise and fall. Empires come and go. The unfinished obelisk continues to rest exactly where its creators left it, neither completed nor destroyed, suspended between intention and abandonment. Today, archaeologists study these monuments not only to understand Egyptian engineering, but also to explore the broader questions they raise. Every unfinished project offers insight into ancient decision-making. Every abandoned monument reveals the uncertainties hidden behind seemingly inevitable achievements. History often focuses on what was built. If the unfinished obelisks of Aswan remind us that even the grandest ambitions can be interrupted before completion, the next mystery concerns something even more elusive. Not a monument frozen in stone, but an event that seems to have faded from the historical record itself. A military campaign undertaken by a pharaoh whose achievements have long been overshadowed by those who ruled before and after him. It is the mystery of the lost campaign of Pharaoh Thutmose II, a campaign that may have altered the course of Egypt's history, a campaign mentioned only in fragments, a campaign whose details seem to have disappeared into the sands of time. The story begins during the early years of Egypt's 18th dynasty, one of the most powerful periods in ancient Egyptian history. The Nile flowed through a kingdom growing rapidly in wealth and influence. Temples rose across the landscape. Trade expanded into distant regions. Military expeditions projected Egyptian power beyond its traditional borders. It was an age of ambitious rulers. Yet among them, Pharaoh Thutmose II remains strangely enigmatic. Unlike his father, the warrior king Thutmose I, or his famous successor, Thutmose III, whose military campaigns are documented in remarkable detail, Thutmose II occupies a shadowy place in the historical record. His reign appears comparatively brief. His monuments are fewer. His achievements often seem obscured by the towering figures who surrounded him. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the mystery of his military activities. Ancient inscriptions indicate that Thutmose II conducted at least one campaign beyond Egypt's borders. Evidence suggests military action against rebellious groups in Nubia to the south. Other records hint at operations in regions to the northeast. Yet the surviving details are frustratingly limited. It is as if historians possess only scattered pages from a much larger story. Enough to confirm that something happened, not enough to fully explain what. Imagine standing in the court of Thutmose II around the mid-15th century BC. Messengers arrive from distant territories. Reports describe unrest. Local rulers challenge Egyptian authority. Military preparations begin. Officials organize supplies. Soldiers gather. Standards bearing royal symbols move through crowded streets. An army departs. Then the trail grows faint. The problem is not that evidence is entirely absent. Rather, it exists in fragments. A damaged inscription here, a brief reference there, a passing mention within later records. These clues suggest military activity, but they rarely provide the detailed narratives that historians would prefer. This absence raises an obvious question. Why do we know so little? One possibility involves the nature of Thutmose II's reign itself. Many scholars believe he ruled for only a relatively short period. If true, his opportunities for extensive military campaigns may have been limited. Major projects could have remained unfinished. Records may never have been fully compiled. A short reign often leaves fewer traces. Yet this explanation only goes so far. Even brief reigns can produce substantial documentation, and some surviving references hint at events significant enough to deserve greater attention. Another possibility involves the survival of records. Ancient Egyptian history depends heavily upon inscriptions, monuments, papyri, and other forms of preservation. Over thousands of years, countless documents have been lost through decay, destruction, recycling, or simple chance. Entire archives have disappeared. Temples have collapsed. Tombs have been looted. It is entirely possible that detailed accounts of Thutmose II's campaigns once existed. If so, they may simply not have survived. The result is a strange historical silence. A military expedition may have taken place. The soldiers marched. The battles occurred. The outcomes shaped events. Yet the written record faded away. The mystery deepens when considering the political context surrounding Thutmose II's rule. His reign sits between two of Egypt's most famous rulers, his father Thutmose I and his son Thutmose III. It is also closely connected to the remarkable figure of Hatshepsut, who would later become one of Egypt's most influential pharaohs. The prominence of these figures may have unintentionally obscured Thutmose II himself. Historical memory is often selective. The achievements of later rulers can overshadow earlier events. Monuments are modified. Narratives are reshaped. Attention shifts elsewhere. Could some details of his campaigns have been absorbed into the accomplishments of those who followed? It is difficult to say. Yet the possibility continues to intrigue historians. One particularly fascinating question concerns the campaign often associated with regions beyond Egypt's northeastern frontier. Several inscriptions suggest military operations against rebellious groups or hostile populations. However, the identities of these opponents remain uncertain. Were they local tribes, independent city-states, coalitions resisting Egyptian expansion? The surviving evidence leaves room for multiple interpretations. Each possibility paints a slightly different picture of what occurred, and each highlights how incomplete our understanding remains. Military campaigns often leave visible traces. fortifications, weapons, battle damage, administrative records. Yet archaeology does not always provide straightforward answers. Evidence can be difficult to interpret. Sites may be reused over centuries. Artifacts may travel far from their original contexts. As a result, linking specific discoveries directly to Thutmose II remains challenging. The pharaoh appears briefly in the light of history, then retreats once more into shadow. Some researchers have suggested that the campaign may have been larger than surviving records imply. Perhaps the expedition secured important trade routes. Perhaps it suppressed a significant rebellion. Perhaps it established conditions that later allowed Egypt's empire to expand further under subsequent rulers. If records documenting these achievements were lost, modern historians would see only fragments of a much larger event. The idea remains speculative, yet it illustrates how fragile historical knowledge can be. A missing inscription, a destroyed archive, a damaged monument. Any of these can transform a major event into a mystery. The Lost campaign also raises broader questions about the nature of historical remembrance. Why do some rulers become legendary while others fade into obscurity? Why do certain victories survive in remarkable detail while others vanish almost completely? The answers often depend less upon the events themselves than upon the survival of evidence. History is not merely a record of what happened. It is a record of what remained visible. Thutmose II's campaign may be one of the clearest examples of this principle. Something occurred. Of that, there is little doubt. Ancient sources confirm military activity. Yet the details have become elusive. The narrative exists only in pieces. As often happens with enduring mysteries, more speculative theories have emerged over time. Some have proposed that additional records remain undiscovered in unexcavated tombs, temple foundations, or forgotten archives. Others suggest that future archaeological discoveries may reveal entirely new information about the campaign's objectives and outcomes. Such possibilities are far from impossible. Ancient Egypt continues to produce remarkable discoveries even today. New inscriptions are uncovered. Previously overlooked texts are re-examined. Fragments are connected to larger historical puzzles. What appears mysterious now may become clearer tomorrow. Yet for the moment, uncertainty remains. The image that emerges is strangely compelling. An Egyptian army moving beyond the Nile Valley. Officers carrying orders sealed with royal authority. Standards fluttering in the desert wind. Soldiers marching toward destinations that are only partly known. Victories perhaps won. Challenges perhaps faced. Events unfolding that would influence lives across distant regions. And then silence. The campaign ends. The records disappear. The memory fades. Only scattered clues remain. Today, historians continue piecing together those clues, searching for connections between inscriptions, monuments, archaeological discoveries, and ancient political developments. Every fragment contributes something. Every discovery offers another glimpse into a reign that remains surprisingly mysterious. Yet the central question persists. What exactly happened during the military expeditions of Thutmose II? Were they routine operations later overshadowed by greater events? Were they significant campaigns whose records were simply lost? Or do they conceal episodes of Egyptian history that have yet to be fully reconstructed? As the centuries pass and the deserts continue guarding their secrets, the lost campaign of Thutmose II remains suspended between history and mystery, a story known to have existed yet preserved only in fragments. And somewhere beneath the sands of Egypt or within the ruins of forgotten sites, there may still be inscriptions waiting to emerge into the light, carrying answers to questions that have remained unresolved for more than 3,000 years. Until that day comes, the army of Thutmose II continues its silent march through the shadows of history, leaving us to wonder what parts of its story have been lost, and what traces may still be waiting to be found. If the lost campaign of Thutmose II reminds us how entire chapters of history can fade into obscurity, the next mystery concerns not a single military expedition, but the gradual disappearance of an age of prosperity that endured for centuries. It is the story of a kingdom that brought stability to one of the ancient world's most important regions, only to vanish amid a period of growing uncertainty. This is the mystery of the end of the Kassite-Babylonian Golden Age. The story begins in the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. At sunrise, the land glows with shades of gold and bronze. Irrigation canals stretch across the countryside. Fields of grain sway beneath the wind. Cities rise above the flat horizon, their temples and palaces standing as symbols of power, tradition, and continuity. For thousands of years, this region had been home to some of humanity's earliest civilizations. Empires rose, empires fell. Dynasties succeeded one another. Yet few periods proved as stable and enduring as the centuries of Kassite rule over Babylonia. The Kassites first emerged in Mesopotamian history during a time of upheaval. Originally arriving from regions to the east, they eventually established themselves as rulers of Babylon following the decline of earlier powers. What followed was remarkable. Rather than simply conquering the region, the Kassites adapted to it. They embraced Babylonian traditions. They maintained existing institutions. They preserved religious practices. They supported trade, agriculture, and administration. Over time, their rule became associated with an unusual degree of political continuity. For nearly 4 centuries, the Kassite dynasty governed Babylonia. In the ancient world, such longevity was extraordinary. Generations were born and died beneath Kassite kings. Entire lifetimes passed without the dramatic dynastic collapses that often characterized ancient history. The kingdom became a respected participant in the international system of the Late Bronze Age. Diplomatic correspondence linked Babylon with Egypt, the Hittites, Assyria, and other major powers. Trade routes carried goods across vast distances. Royal marriages reinforced political relationships. For a time, Babylonia appeared secure, stable, prosperous. Yet beneath that appearance, forces may already have been gathering. The mystery is not simply that the Kassite dynasty ended. All dynasties eventually end. The mystery lies in why a system that had endured for centuries suddenly lost its grip on power. What changed? What disrupted an age that had seemed remarkably resilient? The historical record provides clues, but not certainty. By the late 13th century BC and early 12th century BC, the wider Near East was entering a period of profound instability. Across the eastern Mediterranean and surrounding regions, long-established political systems faced growing pressures. The Hittite Empire collapsed. Major cities were destroyed. Trade networks fractured. Population movements increased. Political uncertainty spread. The world that had connected great kingdoms for centuries began to unravel. Babylonia did not exist in isolation. It was part of this interconnected system. And when the system weakened, the effects may have reached deep into the heart of the Kassite kingdom. One of the most commonly cited explanations involves external pressure. Historical sources indicate increasing conflict with neighboring powers, particularly Assyria and Elam. Both kingdoms possessed ambitions of their own, and both played important roles in the changing political landscape. The Elamites, ruling from the east, eventually launched campaigns into Babylonia. One invasion proved especially significant. Around 1155 BC, the Elamite king Shutruk-Nahunte invaded Babylonia and carried off important treasures, including prestigious monuments and royal symbols. The Kassite dynasty effectively came to an end. For many historians, this invasion represents the final chapter of the story. Yet it may not explain the deeper mystery. Powerful kingdoms rarely collapse because of a single military defeat alone. The invasion ended Kassite rule. But was the kingdom already weakening beforehand? The evidence suggests that possibility. Some scholars believe internal problems may have contributed to the dynasty's vulnerability. Economic difficulties, administrative challenges, political rivalries, regional fragmentation. Any of these factors could gradually erode stability over time. The challenge is that the surviving evidence remains incomplete. Administrative records survive only in fragments. Large portions of the historical narrative have been lost. As a result, historians are often forced to reconstruct events from scattered clues. The picture that emerges is suggestive rather than definitive. Trade may have played a crucial role. The late Bronze Age world depended upon extensive networks connecting distant regions. Luxury goods, metals, raw materials, and manufactured products flowed between kingdoms through complex systems of exchange. When those systems began to break down, the consequences could be severe. A disruption in trade might reduce wealth. Reduced wealth might weaken political authority. Weakened authority could encourage rivals and rebellions. The effects would ripple outward through society. Babylonia's prosperity was tied, at least in part, to participation in this wider world. If the international system faltered, Babylonia could not remain entirely unaffected. Environmental factors have also entered the discussion. Some researchers have identified evidence suggesting periods of climatic instability across portions of the Near East during the broader Bronze Age collapse. Variations in rainfall, agricultural productivity, or water availability could place increasing strain upon ancient societies. For a kingdom dependent upon irrigation and agricultural surplus, even modest disruptions might create serious challenges. Yet environmental explanations remain controversial. Climate can influence history. It rarely determines it by itself. The Kassite kingdom endured for centuries under varying conditions. Any environmental pressures would likely have interacted with political and economic factors rather than acting alone. The mystery becomes even more intriguing when examining the apparent contrast between stability and collapse. For generations, Kassite rule appeared remarkably durable. The dynasty survived challenges that might have destroyed less established governments. Institutions functioned, diplomatic relations continued, cultural traditions flourished. Then, within a relatively short period, the situation changed dramatically. Why? What transformed resilience into vulnerability? Some historians point to the dangers of long-term stability itself. Successful systems can become dependent upon conditions that seem permanent. Trade routes remain open. Alliances remain predictable. Administrative structures continue functioning. Over time, societies may adapt so effectively to stability that they become less prepared for sudden disruption. When multiple crises occur simultaneously, even strong institutions can struggle. This idea aligns with broader theories concerning the collapse of Bronze Age civilizations. Rather than a single cause, researchers increasingly envision interconnected crises reinforcing one another. Political instability weakens trade. Economic problems intensify social tensions. External threats become harder to resist. Environmental stress amplifies existing vulnerabilities. Each problem magnifies the others. Eventually, systems that once appeared secure begin to fail. The Kassite kingdom may have experienced precisely such a process. Yet certainty remains elusive. Part of what makes the mystery so compelling is the nature of the evidence itself. Unlike dramatic destructions preserved beneath layers of ash or rubble, the end of the Kassite Golden Age appears more gradual and complex. There is no single ruined city that explains everything, no surviving document that neatly identifies the cause. Instead, there are fragments, letters, inscriptions, administrative records, archaeological traces. Each contributes a piece of the puzzle. None completes it. As often happens with ancient mysteries, more speculative ideas occasionally emerge. Some have suggested that unknown migrations played a larger role than currently recognized. Others wonder whether political struggles within elite circles weakened the dynasty long before external enemies arrived. Still others imagine lost events that have left little surviving evidence. Forgotten conflicts, undocumented crises, moments preserved only indirectly through the consequences they produced. Such possibilities remain difficult to verify, yet they remind us how much of the ancient world remains hidden. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Kassite mystery is how successful the dynasty once appeared. This was not a kingdom born in chaos. It was a kingdom that had already achieved stability. Its rulers governed for centuries. Its institutions endured. Its culture flourished. And yet, even such longevity could not guarantee permanence. Standing amid the ruins of ancient Mesopotamian cities today, it is difficult not to reflect upon the fragility of human achievements. The canals silted up, palaces crumbled, dynasties disappeared. What once seemed enduring became part of the archaeological record. Yet traces remain. Fragments of tablets, broken inscriptions, scattered monuments, enough to reveal that something significant occurred. Not enough to explain it completely, and so the mystery continues.